Chapter 12:25, Master Save Me. Just as Meng Hao was about to blast up into the sky and start fighting, the Taoist priest appeared in midair, beaming with a huge smile as he hollered, "Don't go, my little disciple." Although his shout seemed casual, it actually caused the sky to shake violently, as if it were about to collapse. In fact, if you looked up, you would see innumerable rifts opening up. The red mist which had been just about to shoot down suddenly shrank back, as if whatever person was concealed inside were suddenly shaking and going all out to retreat. This sudden turn of events caused Meng Hao to stare in shock and also sadness. His original plan had been to leave planet Luo River, and in the process, incite the Chosen in that red mist into fighting, then use a writ of karma to force him or her to owe Meng Hao money. How could he ever have imagined that the Taoist priest would interfere? The level of this priest's cultivation base caused Meng Hao's eyes to widen slightly. He obviously had a very high position in the righteous noble sect, and from the way he had shouted just now, Meng Hao could tell that he was a Three Essences Tao Lord, comparable to Patriarch Black Soul, or perhaps a bit higher. That made Meng Hao even more depressed than before. Back when he couldn't fight Tao Realm experts, he had virtually never encountered a single one. But now that he was capable of fighting them, they seemed to be popping up everywhere. The reality of the situation was that it was because he was in a much different position now, and thus the people he encountered were different. In any of the various mountains and seas, the number of Tao Realm experts would never exceed several dozen. Most of them ended up as patriarchs of various sects, and as such, were not the type of people ordinary cultivators ever encountered. Take, for example, Patriarch Black Soul. In a sect with hundreds of thousands of cultivators, there was only one Tao Realm cultivator, Patriarch Black Soul. And yet, because Meng Hao could fight Tao Realm experts, it was only natural that, when he got involved in a situation, it would take the interference from them to resolve that situation. As for this Taoist priest from the righteous noble sect, he truly was a Three Essences Tao Lord, and was one of three Tao Realm experts in that sect. In fact, he wasn't even the strongest of those three, but rather the second strongest. Having three Tao Realm experts meant that the righteous noble sect was in a very strong position in the Heaven God Alliance, a trend which was very similar to the Ninth Mountain and Sea. "There's no need to flee, my little disciple. Come, return with me to the righteous noble sect. With me around, nobody would ever dare to lay a hand on you." The Taoist priest approached, staring at Meng Hao with wide eyes. Meng Hao subconsciously edged backward. The Taoist priest didn't seem to mind. The more he looked at Meng Hao, the more excited he got because of that righteous, noble aura on him, which was apparently very special. Although the aura was fading, it was still quite apparent. In fact, it was the most clearly visible such aura that the Taoist priest had seen for many years. If only I could have found you before you started practicing cultivation. I could definitely have raised you into the most powerful expert in the righteous noble sect. Although it's not too late. Come. Your name is Meng Hao, right? You know, if you join the righteous noble sect, you can get a Taoist name. My Taoist name is the Noble Ran. Let me think for a second. The Taoist priest slapped his thigh. Smiling radiantly, he said, "I got it. Your Taoist name is the righteous Heoe." The disciples of the righteous noble sect around him exchanged dismayed glances. All of a sudden, they were no longer looking at Meng Hao with hostility, but rather with sympathy. Meng Hao was turning a bit green in the face. The righteous Heoe, the righteous Heoe. When he heard the name, he wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Were it not for the fact that he could tell that the Taoist priest harbored no ill will against him, he would long since have gone ballistic. "This is ridiculous," Meng Hao said, flicking his sleeve. Face cold, he snorted, ignoring the Taoist priest and spinning to shoot up into the sky. He wanted to leave planet Luo River, but at the same time was wary of the Taoist priest. Even though Meng Hao could sense that the man did not want to hurt him, it was still better to be cautious. In order to make sure the man didn't try to stop him, he transformed into an azure roc, flapped his wings and shot away, leaving behind nothing but a series of sonic booms. The Taoist priest stood where he was and did nothing to block Meng Hao's way. Instead, he looked on with a broad smile. The righteous noble sect disciples behind him had strange looks on their faces as they tried to figure out exactly what their muddle-headed patriarch was out to do. "Well, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. However, we are destined to be master and apprentice righteous Heoe. It has been fated by the mountains and seas, it has been fated, that within 10 breaths of time you will return." The Taoist priest's words were very mysterious. He stood there, hands clasped behind his back, looking every bit the transcendent being. Based on physical appearance alone, he appeared to be anything but ordinary. Meng Hao sped along in azure rock form, and within the space of a few breaths of time, he could see that out in the starry sky, tens of thousands of beams of light were shooting in his direction. Boiling killing intent raged, distorting the starry sky. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. Meng Hao would still choose to leave, but soon he realized that among those beams of light were the fluctuations of at least 10 Dao realm experts. All of them were speeding in his direction. Even Meng Hao's scalp went numb at the thought of 10 Dao realm cultivators. That was not even to mention the fact that among those 10 auras, 2 of them exceeded the level of Dao lords. There was no way he could leave now. Even if he somehow got away from planet Luo River, he still wouldn't be able to avoid being killed eventually. Unfortunately, Patriarch Black Soul hated Meng Hao so much that he was willing to treat himself completely viciously. Perhaps individual cultivators might be able to ignore the idea of having him as a slave for 1,000 years, but to a sect as a whole, that was too much of a temptation. They would do anything possible to make that happen. Heaven God Alliance, Meng Hao said, eyes flickering coldly. With a sigh, he rolled his eyes, turned, and headed back down toward the surface of planet Luo River. Even as he turned back, the 10 Dao realm experts joined forces to attack. Rumbling filled the air as the power of numerous essences materialized, transforming into a stream of brilliant light, almost like an enormous whip, which slashed through the void toward Meng Hao even as he retreated back down toward the lands of planet Luo River. At the same time, the rest of the cultivators pushed forward with explosive speed. Back down on planet Luo River, the cultivators from the 4 local sects had just seen Meng Hao leave. Just moments later he returned, looking very out of sorts. Countless beams of light could be seen behind him in the starry sky, as well as a 7-colored light stream. As the 7-colored light stream closed in, Meng Hao's face fell, and he quickly shouted out to the Taoist priest. "Master, save me." The transcendent-looking Taoist priest cleared his throat. Keeping his hands clasped behind his back, he slowly looked up and said, "Who is calling out for Master?" He seemed to be refusing, but really, he was actually quite pleased with himself. Meng Hao smiled bitterly. Behind him, the stream of light was closing in, bursting with killing intent. If it touched him, he wouldn't be killed instantly, but it would definitely reopen the wounds he had just spent all this time healing. Gritting his teeth, he said, I'm the righteous Heiaoi, O Master. If you don't save me right away, then I won't recognize you as my master." Immediately, the Taoist priest's eyes began to shine as brightly as the sun and moon. "Ah, fear not, my little disciple, Master is coming." Laughing with excitement and looking somewhat smug, he suddenly took a step forward. When his foot landed, he was between Meng Hao and the 7-colored stream of light. Suddenly, he lifted his right hand in the air, angling his hand as if he were holding a brush, and then began to write characters in the middle of the air. "How dare you bastards bully my apprentice? The righteous Heiaoi is an upright person with a righteous, noble aura. Any enemy of his is an enemy of mine. You're at the threshold of planet Luo River, and this is the righteous noble sect. Do me a favor and screw off." Colors flashed and the wind howled. As the Taoist priest waved his hand to write characters, magical symbols flickered, and at the same time, a righteous, noble aura suddenly exploded out from him. That in turn seemed to incite the aura of planet Luo River itself, which surged out and slammed into the 7-colored stream of light. Massive rumbling could be heard as the stream of light quivered and then collapsed into pieces. At the same time, the righteous, noble aura shot further out into the starry sky, becoming an invisible pillar of chi that caused the entire starry sky to tremble. The incoming cultivators were all shocked and stopped in place, not daring to get any closer. Numerous shouts of rage could be heard after the stream of light collapsed. "Suran, you oaf, are you crazy?" "He's always been crazy. That's Meng Hao. He's not your apprentice, he's the killer who took out the whole Black Soul Society." "Suran, is your righteous noble sect actually going to violate the orders of the Heaven God Alliance?" The sound of their cries echoed out, causing the lands to quake, rivers to flow backward, and all living beings to tremble. "I might be crazy sometimes, but not today," the Taoist priest replied, his voice booming. "You're the crazy ones. You might not be able to tell, but I can clearly see that Meng Hao has a righteous, noble aura. For him to have an aura like that means that anyone he killed deserved to die. If he exterminated the Black Soul Society, that indicates that the heavens, the 8th mountain and sea itself, and even the will of the entire mountain and sea realm wished the Black Soul Society to be eradicated. It doesn't matter who he is, Meng Hao or some other Hao. Today he's my apprentice, the righteous Heoe. With that, he swished his sleeve, causing massive rumbling to fill heaven and earth as he once again summoned the power of planet Luo River to surge out into the starry sky. Of course, for him to do such a thing twice, to fight back against 10 Dao Realm experts and countless other cultivators, left him with blood oozing out of his mouth. Meng Hao was shaken. He looked silently at the Taoist priest, feeling more than a little moved. After hearing the man talking about his supposed righteous, noble aura, Meng Hao suddenly began to speculate that it actually had something to do with the chi flow of the mountain and sea realm. They were now at an impasse. The cultivators who had come to kill Meng Hao remained out in the starry sky, unwilling to enter planet Luo River. This was one of the original planets of the 8th mountain and sea, not an artificial planet created by some almighty cultivator. It had existed for as long as the 8th mountain and sea had, and was one of only 4 planets like it. All the powerful sects on those primary planets were important parts of the Heaven God Alliance. Furthermore, they all had secret magics that enabled them to control the power of those planets themselves. Chapter 12:26, The Something Seal the Heavens Incantation. In the middle of this intense standoff, the Taoist priest threw his head back and proudly brushed his sleeve. "Disciples of the righteous noble sect, hear my command," he said in a loud voice. "Escort your elder uncle back to the sect." The disciples of the righteous noble sect were shaking in their boots. They looked up at the forces arrayed against them in the sky, then back at Meng Hao and the Taoist priest, bitter smiles on their faces. After a moment of hesitation, they sighed, clasped hands to Meng Hao, and then turned to leave. The other cultivators present, as well as the force in the starry sky, looked on as Meng Hao and the righteous noble sect made their way off. The Taoist priest looked extremely pleased with himself as he quickly caught up with Meng Hao and then walked along at his side, laughing heartily. "The righteous Heoe, well, what do you think? Should we switch to another Taoist name?" Meng Hao hesitated, looking first at the Taoist priest and then all of the disciples of the righteous noble sect. Finally, he sighed. We don't need to switch." "All right, then it's settled." The Taoist priest slapped Meng Hao on the shoulder. "Senior?" Before Meng Hao could say anything else, the Taoist priest glared at him angrily. Meng Hao smiled wryly. Master. The Heaven God Alliance put a bounty on my head. If I go back to the righteous noble sect with you, sir, I'm afraid it would be a big inconvenience." Meng Hao was actually feeling some reservations. Originally, he had planned to simply manipulate the righteous noble sect to make use of their power. However, the way the Taoist priest actually took him under his wing had moved Meng Hao, and now he was worried about dragging the whole sect into his own problems. "Nonsense," the Taoist priest said, sounding completely unruffled. "The righteous noble sect is the #1 sect on planet Luo River and super famous in the Heaven God Alliance. Why should we be scared? What are we, babies? All you did was exterminate the Black Soul Society, right? Fine, one of these days when I'm in a good mood, I'll go exterminate a sect too. There's no way the Heaven God Alliance will put a bounty on MY head." Meng Hao was struck speechless. Although what the Taoist priest said actually made sense, if Meng Hao truly became a disciple of the righteous noble sect, then technically, he would also be a part of the Heaven God Alliance. In that case, everything that had happened would be considered an internal affair of the Heaven God Alliance. If that happened, there would be a plethora of options to resolve the situation. However, Meng Hao had the feeling that things wouldn't necessarily play out as smoothly as the Taoist priest believed. Most important was Meng Hao's own status, that of a cultivator foreign to the 8th mountain and sea. Time passed. They proceeded along, led by the Taoist priest to a huge monastery that consisted of 3 towering mountains. Located at the peak of each mountain was a statue surrounded by clusters of pagodas and buildings. Located in the middle of the 3 mountains was a sprawling Taoist rite temple. Incense smoke swirled up into the air, and the sound of tolling bells could be heard. Cranes soared in the air up above, and countless immortal creatures could be seen lazing about, clearly at peace with the local cultivators. This was the righteous noble sect. As Meng Hao looked around, he could see the powerful aura of heaven and earth filling the sect. Visible within that aura was a sense of uprightness that caused the entire righteous noble sect to feel both ancient and honorable. That was just what he could see at first glance. When he narrowed his eyes and looked closer, he was shocked at what else he could sense: the chief flow of the mountain and sea realm. Shockingly, the righteous noble sect had some of the chief flow of the mountain and sea realm. Although it wasn't much, it indicated that this place was beloved by the mountain and sea realm. Visible on the main gate were 4 characters, bold and powerful. It was impossible to tell how many countless years they had existed there, but looking at them filled a person with strange feelings, as if those characters were eternal and would never fade away. The 4 characters read, "Represent heaven, administer the Tao." The chief flow of the mountains and seas, Meng Hao murmured as he stepped into the monastery. A righteous, noble aura, represent heaven in administering the Tao. Almost as soon as the disciples of the righteous noble sect stepped into their sect, numerous beams of light appeared in the air up above. Those were the cultivators who had come to kill Meng Hao and were now surrounding the righteous noble sect. Even the 10 Tao realm cultivators came and occupied 10 different locations equidistant from the sect. The powerful fluctuations of their cultivation bases were extremely threatening and overbearing. Rumbling could be heard as the righteous, noble aura within the righteous noble sect churned, spreading out to cover the entire sect. The sect's grand protective spell formation was activated, causing the entire sect to suddenly blur from the perspective of those on the outside. The only things most people could see clearly were the 3 huge statues atop the mountain peaks. One of those statues held a sword, another held a scroll, and the last was dressed in a scholar's robe, and held his hands clasped behind his back as he looked up into the sky. When the Tao realm experts on the outside saw those 3 statues, their eyes widened and they said, "The 3 righteous noble saints." As soon as Meng Hao set foot into the sect, a powerful voice instantly echoed out, "Bring Meng Hao to see me now." When the other disciples heard the voice, they immediately bowed their heads respectfully. The Taoist priest was the only one whose eyes flashed angrily as he strode toward the most prominent of the 3 mountain peaks. Meng Hao followed along. The 2 of them hurried forward to the mountain with the statue of the scholar staring into the sky. At the foot of the statue was a temple, outside of which could be seen 2 young boys, sitting there cross-legged. When they saw the Taoist priest, they immediately rose to their feet and clasped hands respectfully. The Taoist priest didn't say anything, but instead stalked past them into the temple entrance. Meng Hao was about to follow him when he turned and said, "Master will go in alone. I want to see whether my words still count for anything in the righteous noble sect." Meng Hao stopped in place. When he looked at the temple in front of him, he could tell that there was some terrifying entity inside, emanating fluctuations that caused enormous pressure to weigh down on him. 3 essences makes a Tao Lord. 4, 5, and 6 essences are Tao sovereigns. The person inside that temple is a Tao sovereign. Meng Hao's pupils constricted. He had faced a 3 essences Tao Lord, had been forced to risk his life in combat, and still had not been able to eke out a victory. If he faced a Tao sovereign, even one with only 4 essences, he would definitely lose. Each essence in the Tao realm created a huge disparity. The difference between a Tao Lord and a Tao sovereign was like the difference between heaven and earth. Therefore, the level of difficulty of breaking through from being a Tao Lord to become a Tao sovereign was incredible. Furthermore, it ensured that in the mountain and sea realm, Tao sovereigns were not common. People like that were actually qualified to vie for the position of mountain and sea lord. Meng Hao took a deep breath and waited silently. The 2 boys standing guard measured him up curiously. They hadn't left the mountain recently, so they actually had no idea who Meng Hao was or what he had done. Time passed, and nothing could be heard from inside the temple. After a while, the 2 boys couldn't hold back from asking Meng Hao some questions. One had a look of sympathy on his face, while the other looked at him with a curious expression as he asked, "Are you Patriarch Noble Ran's new apprentice?" When Meng Hao nodded in response, the 2 boys exchanged a glance, then looked back at Meng Hao. This time both of them wore sympathetic expressions. Then they began to speak in turns. "When I was reading the ancient records, I saw that 1,700 years ago, Patriarch Noble Ran accepted an apprentice, who died 2 months later. 1,500 years ago, he accepted another apprentice who also died after 2 months. 1,300 years ago, he took a 3rd apprentice who also died. To date, Patriarch Noble Ran has had 8 apprentices, none of whom lived past 3 months. All of them died, and furthermore all of them died in very strange ways." "What do you mean strange?" Meng Hao asked, somewhat spooked. "One was struck by lightning. He didn't die from the first lightning bolt, it took dozens. After he died, the sky cleared up immediately. There was one who ended up spontaneously exploding while cultivating. Oh, and another caught fire and burned to death. Another one experienced misfortune for 2 whole months until suddenly a meteor fell out of the sky and crushed him to death. Well, the point is, they all died in different ways." Meng Hao's eyes went wide. He almost couldn't believe what he was hearing. He was just about to ask some more questions when the seemingly quiet temple suddenly began to emanate intense ripples, as if some dispute were underway. After enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn, the Taoist priest burst out angrily. After taking a few steps, he turned and glared back into the temple. You might be a Tao sovereign, and you might be the first patriarch of the righteous noble sect, but your worldview doesn't go past the eighth mountain and sea. I refuse to believe that with your cultivation base, you can't see the righteous, noble aura on this apprentice of mine. The temple was completely quiet. No response could be heard. The Taoist priest stamped his foot and then began to stalk off angrily. As he passed Meng Hao, he motioned to him with his eyes, which caused Meng Hao to turn solemnly and follow him away. They left the central mountain and headed toward the mountain on the left, the one with the sword-wielding statue. At the base of that statue was another temple. After entering the temple, the Taoist priest angrily looked over his shoulder at the central mountain peak. "Master, I think I should probably leave," Meng Hao said slowly. He couldn't stop thinking about the words spoken by the two boys moments ago. "Leave? Where can you leave to?" the Taoist priest said bitingly. "The Heaven God Alliance is huge, and the teleportation portals are still sealed. If you set foot outside, hundreds of thousands of cultivators are going to try to kill you, maybe even more than that. You might have been able to exterminate the Black Soul Society, but can you exterminate the entire Heaven God Alliance? Well, can you?" "Not at the moment, no," Meng Hao replied calmly. "Even if you could, I wouldn't let you. If you were the kind of person to do things like that, how could I have had the face to take you as my apprentice? Besides, it's only natural that I have a way to teleport you out of this piddling Heaven God Alliance. I've bought you 2 months of time, during which you'll just stay here and try to get as many people as possible to come surround the sect. Then when the time comes, I'll teleport you out, and things will be much safer." The Taoist priest sighed deeply. Of course, he didn't notice how jumpy Meng Hao got as soon as he mentioned the time frame of 2 months. "It's too bad that something like this happened right when you became my apprentice." Suddenly, the Taoist priest seemed to go crazy. Gesticulating wildly at the people besieging the sect, he let loose a long stream of curses, after which he stamped his foot. "Damn it, I've had 8 apprentices throughout the years, and in the end they all died. Now that I have a 9th, I won't let him die no matter what. Righteous Heiaui, the time has come for me to instruct you in the righteous noble sect's most powerful, most mysterious, most invincible Taoist magic. It's called the Tao is in my heart, the will is in my eyes, I shall possess the mountains and seas, seal the heavens incantation." The Taoist priest's eyes were completely bloodshot, and when he spoke the final words, "seal the heavens incantation," he spoke them very dramatically, one word at a time. "If you can master that art," he continued solemnly, "then in the future you'll definitely be invincible in the mountain and sea realm." "Master," Meng Hao said tentatively, "did your last 8 disciples also study the something something seal the heavens incantation?" "It's not the something something seal the heavens incantation. It's the Tao is in my heart, the will is in my eyes, I shall possess the mountains and seas, seal the heavens incantation. As for your other poor elder brothers, of course they studied it, each and every one of them. Unfortunately, before any of them could finish, they died." The Taoist priest looked sad, very sad, and not the least bit of that was an act. Chapter 12:27, Taoist Priest. "The Tao is in my heart, the will is in my eyes, I shall possess the mountains and seas, seal the heavens incantation." Meng Hao had just arrived in the righteous noble sect. It was currently evening, the sun was setting off in the distance, and a cool breeze rustled through the swaying flowers and vegetation that covered the mountains. Meng Hao stared blankly at this master of his, whose unreliability could only be outdone by patriarch reliance. He listened silently as the Taoist priest began to explain the so-called something something seal the heavens incantation. This incantation is incredibly powerful, super powerful, invincibly powerful. Its creator is a one-of-a-kind super genius in the 8th mountain, and in fact, no one else like him has existed since the creation of the mountain and sea realm. The first requirement of the incantation is that you possess a righteous, noble aura. Then, you must have a fearless heart. You have to place the 8th mountain and sea within your heart, and then do the same for all the other mountains and seas, until all 9 mountains and seas are inside of you. After that, you can force the mountain and sea realm to recognize you as its lord. If you succeed, then you will have completed the first step of the incantation. After that is the second step, sealing the heavens. You will have to seal each one of the 33 heavens, which will in turn cause your cultivation base to increase by a factor of 100% with each sealing. After sealing the 33 heavens, then, theoretically speaking, your cultivation base should be 33 times more powerful. As the Taoist priest spoke, his expression was one of reminiscence, and he seemed profoundly ancient. Meng Hao hesitated for a moment. Seeing how entranced the Taoist priest seemed to be, he couldn't hold back from asking, "And after that?" "After that, there's nothing after that," the Taoist priest replied, glaring. "By that point you'll be invincible. You don't need anything after that. Besides, it's hard to imagine anything more. Impossible, really." After a moment of silence, Meng Hao asked, "Master, sir, you created the something seal the heavens incantation, right?" "Ha ha ha, so you live up to my expectations as my disciple, even if you're not quite as smart as me. Excellent deduction. Since you found me out, Master won't hide the truth any longer. You are absolutely, positively correct. Your master has been keeping this secret for 2,000 years now. At long last I can speak it out in the open. Righteous Heiaui, listen well. The Tao is in my heart, the will is in my eyes, I shall possess the mountains, and seal the heavens incantation was created by me. It is the most powerful, most mysterious, and most supreme Taoist magic in the righteous noble sect." The Taoist priest swished his sleeve and raised his right hand dramatically into the air. Meng Hao chuckled wryly. He suddenly realized he had a headache. The Taoist priest glared at Meng Hao out of the corner of his eye, clearly displeased. "This is when you're supposed to cheer." Meng Hao stood there silently. However, the Taoist priest continued to hold the pose tenaciously. After a long, awkward moment, Meng Hao thought about how the man had protected him, and he sighed. Forcing himself to sound excited, he said, "Master, you're so incredible." The Taoist priest laughed loudly, then lowered his hand. "Just trust your master. The Tao is in my heart, the will is in my eyes, I shall possess the mountains and seal the heavens incantation is incredibly powerful. Considering the level of my cultivation base, I can only use it at 10% of its full power. But even that 10% is very, very, very powerful. Way more powerful than me. You have my word on that." The Taoist priest was bragging so hard that, though he was trying to seem high and mighty, spittle flew from his mouth. With that he swished his sleeve, raised his right index finger into the air, and pointed straight up into the sky. Come, it's time to practice the incantation. Just watch how I do it." "The Tao is in my heart," he roared, causing the words to echo out through the sect. Meng Hao couldn't help but notice that all of the disciples in the Taoist Rite Temple at the base of the mountain quickly lowered their heads in embarrassment. He looked back at the Taoist priest, unable to prevent his eyelid from twitching uncontrollably. The Taoist priest then bent his legs to form a circle, then raised his right hand up again, except this time to his forehead. "Follow me," he said, glaring at Meng Hao. "Come on." Meng Hao cleared his throat and thought once again about how the Taoist priest had personally taken him under his protection. Sighing, he bent his legs to form a circle, and then, with difficulty, raised his hand vertically in front of his forehead. "Say the words," urged the Taoist priest. Meng Hao gritted his teeth and finally decided to just give in. The Tao is in my heart," he roared. The Taoist priest's eyes glittered and he laughed. "Good, very good. Now for the second stance." Next, he lifted his left hand up and held it horizontally in front of the other hand, to make the character Chinese letter. "The will is in my eyes," he roared. No matter how you looked at it, the horizontal position of his left hand made it so that his eyes were completely covered up. Having no other choice, Meng Hao followed suit. "I shall possess the mountains and seas," the Taoist priest cried. He squatted down and leaped high into the air, looking very much like a frog. Meng Hao gaped with wide eyes, but finally gritted his teeth and followed along, jumping up into the air. "Seal the heavens. Incantation." Hovering there in midair, the Taoist priest stretched both hands out wide, threw his head back and roared. His voice resonated out in all directions, becoming clearly audible to even the cultivators who had surrounded the sect. Strange expressions became visible on all of their faces. As for Meng Hao, he simply didn't have the courage to yell out the words, "Seal the heavens incantation," so loudly. Smiling bitterly, he spoke them out much more quietly and then splayed his arms. The entire area around him then filled with nothing. There was absolutely no change. "Not bad," the Taoist priest said, looking pleased. "You keep practicing this magic for the next 2 months. Trust me, it's incredibly powerful, invincible in heaven and earth. It can sweep across anything in the mountains and seas and can even exterminate paragons." Meng Hao couldn't think of anything to say in response. "All right, that will do for now. You keep cultivating that on your own, I have some things to take care of." With that, the Taoist priest waved his sleeve and headed down the mountain, quickly quickly vanishing. Meng Hao sighed and sat down cross-legged. Frowning, he began to consider what other options were available in escaping the Heaven God Alliance's manhunt, as this place wasn't a long-term option. The Taoist priest was muddle-headed, but the first patriarch of the righteous noble sect was not, and clearly wasn't willing to let him stay here permanently. Obviously, the Taoist priest had forcefully demanded to have even the 2 months of time. Well, that's fine, Meng Hao thought. That will be enough for me to finish healing up and get back to my peak. Eyes glittering coldly, he took a deep breath and then began to meditate to treat his injuries. Before too much time passed, rumbling could be heard from off in the distance, and a pillar of light shot up into the sky. Within that light was the shadow of a person who was seemingly teleporting off to some other location. Meng Hao immediately opened his eyes and looked over. He found himself looking in the direction of the righteous noble sect's teleportation portal. His eyes flickered for a moment before he once again began to work on his injuries. More time passed. Soon, 10 days had gone by. During those 10 days, Meng Hao occasionally went down the mountain to watch the disciples of the righteous noble sect practicing cultivation, where he could sense the chi flow of the mountain and sea realm, as well as the righteous, noble aura. Unfortunately, he could only spend about half of each day working on healing his injuries. The other times, the Taoist priest would drag him off to cultivate the something-something seal the heavens incantation. At first, Meng Hao was too polite to refuse. However, it quickly reached the point where he felt like he just couldn't take it anymore. Luckily, though, nothing strange happened as a result of practicing it. No misfortune, no lightning strikes, no spontaneous combustion. Although he wanted to refuse, every time he thought about how the Taoist priest had stood up to all of the cultivators out in the starry sky on his behalf, he simply couldn't bring himself to say anything. So he went along, albeit half-heartedly. But then one day when he went down the mountain, he happened to be passing through a valley when he overheard 2 disciples talking. Elder Grandfather Noble Ran has gone crazy again. For the past 10 days or so, he's been using the teleportation portal at least 10 times per day. All he does is send some random things to random places. What the heck is he doing? It costs quite a few spirit stones to use the teleportation portal, especially for sending things to the destination and back. And he goes somewhere different every time. Well, there's nothing you can do about it, the 2 disciples sighed. Shaken, Meng Hao hurried over to where the teleportation portal was located, where he saw the Taoist priest handing some spirit stones over to the disciple in charge. Apparently, he was preparing to teleport some spirit creatures who were polymorphed into humanoid shapes. Sensing Meng Hao's presence, the Taoist priest turned. As soon as he saw Meng Hao, he laughed heartily. So it's my little disciple. Come, let's head back and practice the seal the heavens incantation some more. He stepped forward, grabbed Meng Hao's arm, and then sped back toward the mountain peak. Meng Hao didn't say anything on the way, and when they reached the mountain peak, he practiced the seal the heavens incantation with unusual earnestness. He performed every motion meticulously, and even cried out the words as loud as possible. After practicing for a few hours, Meng Hao suddenly asked, "Master, why have you been using the teleportation portal so much in the past few days?" "Why?" the Taoist priest replied, sounding surprised. "Well, for you, of course. I used to say you were almost as smart as me on a good day, kid, so how could you be so dumb? After the 2 months are over, you're going to need to teleport out of here. Since the teleportation portal are sealed, it's impossible to leave the Heaven God Alliance directly. You can still teleport to regions that are near the exits, though. However, there are far too many methods to interfere with a teleportation. Someone can even interrupt it when you're halfway there. Therefore, just to be safe, I'm clouding the waters a bit. If I activate the teleportation portal multiple times a day for 2 months in a row, then the people looking for you are gradually going to lose their patience. Then eventually, you can just slip through." Meng Hao's heart trembled as he looked at the Taoist priest. This was a person he had never met before in his life, and yet had moved him repeatedly just in the past few days. The world of cultivation was a cold place in which people constantly fought and schemed against each other. It was a dog-eat-dog world. However, the more the world was like that, the more precious certain acts of beauty were. They were unforgettable things, things to be engraved upon the heart and never parted with. Perhaps there were certain qualities that remained in a cultivator no matter what level they practiced cultivation to. After all, in the end, they were people and not animals. Meng Hao looked at the Taoist priest for a moment, then clasped hands and bowed very deeply. In the following days, he did not practice half-heartedly anymore. He would earnestly follow along with the Taoist priest in practicing the seal the heavens incantation. He was convinced that it was not really a Taoist magic, but rather something invented by the Taoist priest, a figment of his imagination. Eventually, Meng Hao learned that the Taoist priest had not always been this way. Once, a long time ago, he had left the sect only to return heavily injured, his beloved partner dead, and his children lost to the ravages of time. He came back alone, holding nothing but a piece of black leather the size of a hand, after which he lapsed into a coma. It was from that moment on that he occasionally became muddle-headed. As to what had happened to his family, he never talked about it. The sect made some investigations, but were never able to find any clues. However, the Taoist priest began to occasionally sit alone on the top of the statue on the mountain peak, looking off into the sky, laughing madly, raving, tears streaming down his face. A month into his time in the sect, Meng Hao even saw it happen once. The moon was shining high in the sky as the Taoist priest sat atop the statue, laughing or perhaps crying. Chapter 12:28, Supreme Power. It was like a frightening laughter that, if you listened to it long enough, sounded like weeping laced with indescribable sorrow. Meng Hao stared silently at the Taoist priest sitting there on the statue, then closed his eyes. It was not a moment to disturb the man. He knew that the Taoist priest was now in his own world. At dawn, the Taoist priest vanished, and then reappeared in front of Meng Hao, as muddle-headed and unreliable as ever. When Meng Hao opened his eyes, he saw a lively and energetic Taoist priest standing there who didn't seem to have a care in the world. "Come, come, my little disciple, shout loudly with your master. The Tao is in my heart, the will is in my eyes, I shall possess the mountains and seas, seal the heavens incantation." Time passed. More and more cultivators were gathering outside of the righteous noble sect. They crowded the lands and filled the sky. More than 1 million cultivators had been attracted to the area because of Meng Hao. The righteous noble sect felt a lot of pressure, and the sect's protective spell formation was active day and night. No one dared to relax for a moment, and the disciples were constantly on guard. One by one, more Tao realm experts arrived. Eventually there were almost 20, causing a terrifying pressure to weigh down on the entire area. Occasionally, the mass of cultivators would cause ripples to spread out across the land, and the sky would distort under their auras. The pressure was so strong that it seemed like the heavens themselves were bearing down. No smiles could be seen on the faces of the disciples of the righteous noble sect, and on more than one occasion, Meng Hao could see hateful glances cast in his direction. Although this was the righteous noble sect, where they cultivated a righteous, noble aura, the pressure from the outside and the danger, the sect was now and made it unavoidable that they feel rancor toward the person who had brought this down upon them. Meng Hao rarely went down off the mountain anymore. He simply sat there quietly, watching the teleportation portal being activated 10 times, sometimes even dozens of times, each day. It was happening with such frequency that it became mundane, and every time it activated, human-looking figures would be among the things that were teleported. Occasionally, the teleportation portal would be used several dozen times in a row. This ensured that there was no pattern to how it was being used, and also caused the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance on the outside who wanted to try to break the teleportation process to slowly grow completely exhausted. Soon there were only 20 days left of the 2-month period. On one particular afternoon, the Taoist priest found Meng Hao to practice the seal the heavens incantation, after which he suddenly said, "All right, enough time has passed. We don't want anyone to be able to calculate the time exactly, so therefore, you're leaving right now." Meng Hao's eyes flickered with a serious look as he slowly rose to his feet. He clasped hands and bowed deeply. Then the two of them sped over to the location of the teleportation portal. This was not their first trip there together. They had actually been on numerous occasions. Not only would it make it difficult for anyone on the outside to detect what was going on, it would also confuse anyone within the sect who was paying attention and passing information to the outside. When they got to the teleportation portal, it had already been activated, and someone was inside, waiting to be teleported away. The surrounding disciples in charge of the portal didn't pay much attention at all to the Taoist priest and Meng Hao, who they were used to seeing here. The Taoist priest looked at Meng Hao and began to speak in a hoarse voice. "If the teleportation goes successfully, you'll emerge near the border of the Heaven God Alliance. The border region is too vast and can't be sealed completely, so that will be your opportunity. You'll need to employ as much speed as you can manage to cross the border and leave the Heaven God Alliance. Then, you'll be safe. If anyone blocks your path, or destroys the teleportation path, Then remember to keep heading in the same direction that the path was taking you. Once you step onto the teleportation portal, everything will be up to you. Suddenly he flicked his sleeve, causing the teleportation portal to perform several teleportations in a row. Rumbling filled the air and bright light rose up, but then it suddenly stopped. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, the Taoist priest suddenly barked, "Now!" Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He stepped into the teleportation portal without the slightest hesitation. Almost immediately, he saw that outside of the righteous noble sect were countless other teleportation portals being activated at the same time, as the cultivators there tried to match their frequencies to the teleportation portal inside the sect. Meng Hao's face flickered, but it was at this point that the Taoist priest suddenly stepped into the teleportation portal and grabbed Meng Hao by the arm. In the instant that the teleportation portal was activated, the Taoist priest leapt off of the portal, dragging Meng Hao with him as he then flickered and shot up into the sky at high speed. Immediately, numerous angered cries could be heard from outside the righteous noble sect. "Shameless! Noble Ran, don't tell me you're rebelling against the Heaven God Alliance. Damn it!" More than half of the Tao realm experts on the outside were already bathed in the light of teleportation. The Taoist priest had timed his move very craftily. Once the portals were activated, there was no way for the people inside them to leave, and they had to go along with the teleportation. The remaining Tao realm experts who had not entered teleportation portals bellowed in rage and shot into the air toward the Taoist priest. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. The Taoist priest hadn't mentioned anything at all about this before. Obviously, everything he had been doing with the teleportation portals in the past several weeks, including the feint just now, had been a trap. It was all bait to lure the experts of the Heaven God Alliance away. The Taoist priest never had any intention of having Meng Hao use the righteous noble sect's teleportation portal to escape. Doing that was far too unsafe and had too many weak points. However, his performance had been so realistic that many people were fooled, and no matter whether they were willing or not, got stuck in the teleportation portals and then vanished. In fact, there was an even deeper layer to this plan. Because of all the activity with the teleportation portals, the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance had long since concentrated all of their attention on the portal. In order to intercept him, massive numbers of cultivators had even been arranged to surround every teleportation node within the entire alliance. Furthermore, they engaged the help of almighty experts whose task was expressly to cover planet Luo River with their divine sense, laying in wait to sever any teleportation beams leaving the planet. If Meng Hao really had tried to get away via teleportation, it would have been impossible for him to reach his destination. He would have been attacked and forcibly ejected from the teleportation beam. Rumbling echoed out as the Taoist priest shot up into the sky with Meng Hao, moving at incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, they were outside of planet Luo River. Meng Hao looked over at the Taoist priest and was once again deeply moved. Behind them, angered roars could be heard as 6 beams of light closed in, 6 almighty Tao realm cultivators. Behind them were countless more cultivators, all of them racing to catch up with the Taoist priest and Meng Hao. It only took a moment for the other cultivators throughout the Heaven God Alliance, the ones sent to lock down the teleportation portals or ambush Meng Hao's teleportation beam, to be notified of what had happened. They immediately abandoned their positions and raced toward planet Luo River at top speed. One slight change can sometimes have a huge effect on the overall situation. The Taoist priest's sudden action caused the entire setup put in place by the Heaven God Alliance to be ruined. Rumbling echoed out in all directions as the Taoist priest and Meng Hao entered the starry sky. "Come with me," the Taoist priest said, eyes glittering. He waved his hand, causing a flying shuttle to appear, upon which he and Meng Hao alighted. Then, rumbling could be heard as the flying shuttle shot out into the starry sky at incredible speed. As soon as he landed on the flying shuttle, Meng Hao shivered and looked down at it. "This is... How could Master allow anyone to harm you, my little disciple? The righteous noble sect's teleportation portals were all being watched. Even if they hadn't been, I would never have felt at ease letting you use them. The only type of teleportation portal I can trust would be one created by myself. This flying shuttle is actually a teleportation portal. Sit down cross-legged and merge your mind into the shuttle. Go quickly. The faster the shuttle goes, the more powerful the teleportation will be. I refuse to believe that these people could have predicted that I would have a flying shuttle teleportation portal." With that, the Taoist priest waved his hand behind him. Rumbling echoed out as the 6 pursuing Dao realm experts launched attacks. The Taoist priest trembled and blood oozed out of his mouth. He might be strong, but he was not strong enough to handle 6 Dao realm cultivators simultaneously. It was at this point that 2 streams of divine sense suddenly shot through the air toward them all. Shockingly, these were also Dao realm experts. Now there were 8 of them, 3 of which were Dao lords. All of these people were on the level of patriarchs in the various sects of the Heaven God Alliance, and when they combined forces, their essence power caused the shuttle to tremble on the verge of collapse. Meng Hao's face flickered, and the Taoist priest suddenly threw his head back and laughed. Then, he reached down and slapped his left hand onto the surface of the flying shuttle, giving it more power. It suddenly shot forward at 10 times its original speed. It was moving so fast that it seemed to be engulfed with flames. Simultaneously, the teleportation portal inside began to activate. A shapeless rift opened up in front of the shuttle, and it looked as if the shuttle were about to be swallowed up by a huge mouth. This caused the faces of all the observers to fill with shock. The Dao realm patriarchs howled in rage. "You can't get away," one of them roared. As soon as the words rang out, it seemed like the rules of nature changed to follow suit. Essence transformed into natural law, wrapping around Meng Hao. However, it was at this moment that the Taoist priest began to laugh loudly. Eyes shining, he shouted. "Watch closely, my apprentice. Before you leave, your master will demonstrate the seal the heavens incantation." With that, he bent his legs into a circle and then pointed his right index finger up into the starry sky. "The Tao is in my heart." As soon as the words left his mouth, time seemed to slow to a halt and everything stopped moving. A righteous, noble aura filled the area, and the 8th mountain and sea began to tremble. More shocking of all was that the Taoist priest's bent legs all of a sudden looked like a tilted mountain peak. "The will is in my eyes." He moved his left hand to intersect with his right hand. His hair whipped about wildly, and a strange gleam shone from his eyes. At the same time, an indescribable aura suddenly began to radiate out from him. "I shall possess the mountains and seas, seal, the heavens, incantation." With that, his legs straightened as he leaped up and stretched his arms out wide. The 8th mountain was shaking so violently it seemed as if it would crumble. The 8th sea howled, and the starry sky distorted. Everything was in chaos. As for Meng Hao, he could see the chief flow of the mountain and sea realm converging on the Taoist priest. Massive power built up in his outstretched arms and then shot out into the starry sky. Faintly, an image of the 9 mountains and 9 seas of the mountain and sea realm appeared, filled with supreme power. Everyone present was completely shocked. Chapter 12:29, Did I Say You Could Go? Meng Hao watched as the 9 mountains and the 9 seas formed into the shape of a huge giant, apparently shaped together by the call of the Taoist priest's magic. As soon as it appeared there in the starry sky, it waved its finger toward the enemy cultivators. That simple wave of a finger caused the starry sky to be swept away, layer after layer. The cultivators' faces were filled with shock and quickly fell back, even the Tao realm experts. Many people were aware that the noble Ran of the righteous noble sect had created the seal the heavens incantation. When it was brought up in conversation, it was generally considered a big joke, and therefore, no one would ever have been able to guess that when the Taoist priest unleashed it on this day, it would explode out with a shocking, supreme power. Blood sprayed out of the mouths of the ordinary cultivators, and the Tao realm experts could not prevent the blood from oozing out of their mouths. The single wave of the giant's finger was apparently backed by the power of the mountains and seas, and it wasn't targeting the cultivators in order to harm them. It was actually performing a sealing. One swipe of a finger was sealing the heavens. If the heavens could be sealed, there was no need to even mention the people under them. That waving finger caused sealing marks to appear on all the cultivators. One by one, they coughed up blood and were sent spinning through the starry sky, completely out of control. The seal the heavens incantation. This is impossible. How could the noble Ran's poppycock magical technique actually be so powerful? Everyone was astonished. The Taoist priest was trembling, and he also coughed up a mouthful of blood, and instantly aged significantly. In order to avoid any further trouble for the righteous noble sect, he ceased any further attacks. Then he turned and looked at the resplendent beam of light which was fading off into the distance. It was almost as if he could see Meng Hao within the light, and could tell that he was just as shocked as all the other cultivators at what had happened. "My little disciple," he said coolly, "this is your master's seal the heavens incantation." Then he remained there, hovering in midair, surrounded by the other cultivators who had all just been scattered about. A certain aura was emanating off of him in that moment, an aura that was difficult to describe. Suddenly, he no longer seemed muddle-headed and unreliable. He looked like a transcendent being, completely beyond ordinary. Completely ignoring the other cultivators, he turned and headed back to planet Luo River and the righteous noble sect. In another patch of the starry sky in the territory of the Heaven God Alliance, near the border, floated an asteroid. No records from any sect contained any information about a teleportation node on this particular asteroid, but all of a sudden, it began to glow brightly. Moments later, the asteroid exploded into pieces as a stone platform appeared from within. The platform itself was covered with cracks and the markings of a teleportation spell formation. The spell formation was currently activated and running at full power, and from the looks of it, it wouldn't be too long until it broke down completely. Soon, more cracks appeared over its surface, and a flying shuttle flew out from inside of it. As soon as it did, the stone platform lost its ability to hold itself together and shattered. At the same time, the flying shuttle also transformed into ash. Subsequently, Meng Hao appeared there in the starry sky. Everything was quiet, not a single sound could be heard. Meng Hao turned and looked off into the distance, still thinking with amazement about what he had just seen. Seal, the heavens, incantation, he murmured. How could he ever have imagined that the Taoist priest's comical magical technique would be so shockingly powerful? For one person to seal hundreds of thousands of cultivators. Well, that Taoist magic was definitely no ordinary Tao. It had ascended to the level of a strategic weapon. One could even imagine how, if there was some great war being fought, the Taoist priest could completely turn the tides by himself. In all the years he had practiced cultivation, Meng Hao had never seen anything like it before, and it left his heart racing. After all, throughout the more than 1 month that he had been in the righteous noble sect, he had practiced the technique hundreds of times at the bequest of the Taoist priest. There's always something new to learn, he murmured. The further you travel, the more you see and experience. It's only then that you realize that there are heavens beyond what you imagine could exist, and likewise, people who exceed your imagination. Likewise, whatever Taoist magics you knew, there are always more powerful ones out there. Staring off into the distance, he clasped hands and bowed deeply in his appreciation toward the Taoist priest. Meng Hao was the type of person to remember every single individual who had helped him. However, he also knew that now was not the time to wallow in emotions. After bowing, he quickly shot off into the distance. The border region of the Heaven God Alliance is dotted with artificial planets that are used as teleportation checkpoints. Other than those planets, there is nothing else but the vast border itself. The gateway planets will be heavily fortified, and I definitely won't be able to get past them. Therefore, I'll just have to break through that endless border. Having made his decision, he took advantage of the fact that no one was around to shoot off into the distance. Time passed. A day later, something like a white line appeared off in the distance. At first, he couldn't quite tell what it was, but as he neared, the white line turned into a white wall. It was illusory and spread out as far as the eye could see in either direction. Meng Hao looked it over, hesitating for a moment. Finally, a cold glint appeared in his eyes as he shot toward the wall. He reached it in the blink of an eye, and then slammed into it with the full force of his Paragon bridge. The wall shuddered, and cracking sounds could be heard as fissures spread out across the surface of the wall. Just as he was on the verge of breaking through, his face fell, and he suddenly stopped in place due to the intense sensation of deadly crisis that filled his mind. A beam of light suddenly appeared out in the void, spreading out as if to envelop Meng Hao and lock him in place. Nobody who goes berserk in the Heaven God Alliance can leave peacefully. The owner of the calm voice was an illusory face which had just appeared in the starry sky. It was none other than the old man who had originally determined Meng Hao's location. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed icily, and he gave a cold harumph as he once again battered the white wall, shattering it. He burst through, assuming he was now outside of the Heaven God Alliance, only to find that directly ahead of him was a second white line, which was a second white wall. Just looking at it, it was possible to tell that there was not just a second white wall, but beyond it, a third one and a fourth one. They went on, packed together one after another. Unexpectedly, there were no less than 100,000 walls. Meng Hao's face instantly turned unsightly. The Heaven God Alliance is not a place where people can just come and go as they please. The noble Ran might have helped you, but you still have no way of escaping. Even as the old man spoke, the light of numerous teleportations began to shine up in the area. A total of 15 teleportation formations could now be seen, with the shadows of countless individuals forming inside of them. Once they fully appeared, it seemed as if Meng Hao would have no other choice but to attempt to flee. However, the old man had underestimated Meng Hao. In almost the same instant the teleportation light began to shine, Meng Hao suddenly looked over at the illusory face. So it turns out you can't come here personally, nor can you actually kill me. All you can do is control the power of the Heaven God Alliance's border. The old man's expression flickered as Meng Hao's cultivation base suddenly exploded with the power of an all-heaven Dao immortal and his peak fleshly body. Rumbling sounds could be heard as, unexpectedly, he didn't flee, but instead shot toward the teleportation portals. As soon as he closed in, he unleashed the god-slaying fist. The fist landed on a teleportation portal that was just about to complete its teleportation. When Meng Hao struck it, it distorted, and then the cultivators inside shouted out in astonishment. "Break," Meng Hao said coolly. Instantly, the teleportation collapsed, and the cultivators inside began to distort as the teleportation magic was destroyed. As for the cultivators inside, only the most powerful were free from danger, and yet, even they were now incapable of completing the teleportation. "Child," the face roared angrily, and yet it was powerless to do anything. Meng Hao pretended as if he hadn't heard anything at all. His body flickered as he unleashed another fist strike. One punch. One punch. Rumbling could be heard as 3 teleportation portals were destroyed in quick succession. As for the other 11, the people inside were materializing. Meng Hao laughed coldly, then raised both hands high into the air. As he lowered them, he cried, "Paragon Bridge." "Are you MMMBLLLE?" The Paragon Bridge then exploded out from inside Meng Hao, bursting through the starry sky with crushing pressure. Instantly, 4 more teleportation portals were destroyed, and a moment later, 5. There were only 2 teleportation portals which actually managed to finish their teleportation. Before they could be destroyed, the people inside of them charged out. There were a total of about 100 cultivators, led by 2 people. One of them wore a long, blood-colored robe, and the other was the young man shadowed by the heaven god image, who had his hands clasped behind his back. After looking around for a moment, their scalps went numb, and they actually wished that they hadn't successfully teleported here to begin with. Of the 15 teleportation portals they had begun with, only 2 had managed to teleport their passengers successfully. The 2 leaders' hearts began to pound. Looking over at Meng Hao, they began to back up. They had come here to chase Meng Hao down and kill him, but now they were the ones who were running away. Meng Hao looked over at the enraged, illusory face and said, "Since you won't let me leave, then, I guess I'll just stick around and have my fill of slaughtering your people for a while." Laughing coldly, he shot toward the newly arrived cultivators. 100 or so cultivators' scalps were all numb from the sight of Meng Hao charging them, his energy surging. The cultivators' minds reeled and they fell into retreat. If they had a bit more of an advantage in terms of numbers, and if they had some Dao realm support, then they would be able to surround Meng Hao and bombard him from all sides. But now, they were facing Meng Hao by themselves, and it instantly drained their courage. After all, the person who had completely exterminated the Black Soul Society was the type of person who left them completely terror-struck. "Think you can just leave?" Meng Hao asked, killing intent flickering in his eyes. He was already completely fed up with being chased, so he transformed into an azure-colored rock and shot toward the nearest cultivator. A talon that could shatter metal or rock slammed into the man's head, and a cracking sound rang out. Blood spurted out in all directions, but by then Meng Hao had already appeared in front of another cultivator, whereupon he flapped his wings and transformed into a beam of azure light. Everywhere he went, blood-curdling screams rang out. The young man in the leadership position was terrified and completely regretted coming to this place as his heaven god image suddenly shattered. A popping sound could suddenly be heard from the other young leader, who instantly transformed into a red mist. "So it turns out it was you." Meng Hao eyed the red mist. Completely ignoring the young man with the heaven god image, he shot forward in pursuit of the red mist. Note from Deathblade: "My apologies, but the next update won't be coming for another 24-36 hours. Details about why can be found here." /expand. "It's not me," cried an alarmed voice from within the red mist. This was indeed the same person who had appeared a month before. At that time, the Taoist priest had ended up taking Meng Hao away, and therefore, this young man had managed to avoid meeting a calamity. Upon this second meeting, the red mist immediately attempted to flee at top speed. However, Meng Hao waved his finger, unleashing the 8th demon sealing hex. The mist immediately lurched to a stop, and Meng Hao advanced, waving his arm, which caused the entire patch of mist to be blasted away. Revealed inside was a young man in a red robe. Face flickering, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture and then pointed at Meng Hao. Meng Hao's blood immediately began to flow backward, and his cultivation base rotated in reverse. He stopped in place, his face bright red. Killing intent flickered in the eyes of the young man who, instead of fleeing, turned and lifted both hands into the air. Even as he closed in on Meng Hao, an old man materialized from thin air nearby, his face grim and also filled with killing intent. This man was obviously the younger man's Tao protector. Both attacked with thunderous speed, and yet, as they neared, Meng Hao merely smiled. That smile caused the old Tao protector's heart to feel as if it had been struck by lightning. Before he could even react, Meng Hao shot forward, unleashing 1, 2, 3 fists onto him. A boom could be heard as the man's body exploded into fragments, and he was completely destroyed, without even being given a chance to scream. It was an instant fatality. The red-robed young man's eyes widened, and he instantly began to back up. But Meng Hao was already upon him, and began to unleash the same punch he had released onto the old man. "You can't kill me. My father is the Blood Seal sect." Before the young man could finish speak, Meng Hao's fist landed. A boom rang out and the young man's body trembled. Then he looked down at himself and saw a huge, gaping hole in his chest. The terrifying explosive power continued to flood out through his body, which then began to crack and fall apart. Moments later, he was completely dead, even his soul. "Well, why didn't you speak up earlier?" Meng Hao said, frowning with the realization that he probably shouldn't have killed this person. If his father was somebody important, he surely could have ransomed him for a hefty price. Unfortunately, the young man hadn't spoken up quickly enough. "I originally only had one enemy, which was the Black Soul Society, but with so many cultivators trying to chase me down and kill me, well, let's just see who's the last one standing." He flicked the blood off of his hand and turned, eyes flickering with killing intent as he vanished. 2 days later, the hunt for Meng Hao was still going on in the Heaven God Alliance's territory. Suddenly, he ran into a squad of about 100 cultivators. Unfortunately for them, they had no Tao Realm expert to lead them, and therefore, after about 10 breaths of time passed, they were completely wiped out. Another day passed. In another location, he ran into 300 cultivators. They were similarly wiped out. The Heaven God Alliance was furious, and countless cultivators were mobilized to try to chase down Meng Hao. However, anytime they were able to pinpoint his location, he was simply too fast, and by the time a Tao Realm expert arrived on the scene, he would be long gone. On the 6th day, a group comprised entirely of Heaven God Society disciples ran into him, and was completely wiped out. That completely enraged the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance. However, on the 7th day, something happened which caused the number of cultivators who were pursuing Meng Hao to suddenly drop by a significant number. Even the highest-ranking members of the Heaven God Alliance itself were shocked. Meng Hao killed a Tao Realm cultivator. That person might only have been a one-essence Tao Realm cultivator, but he was in that most mighty of realms, the type of person who could be a true patriarch. He suddenly appeared when Meng Hao was in the middle of wiping out a group of Heaven God Alliance cultivators. Meng Hao immediately stopped attacking his current target and shot toward the Tao Realm expert. They then engaged in a fierce battle in the starry sky. Although it first seemed as if it would be a protracted fight, Meng Hao killed him after only an hour. That completely shook everyone who was chasing him, and brought them back to their senses after the intoxicating thought of the prize for catching him. In fact, many sects even issued orders to their disciples to stop going after Meng Hao and return to the sect. That battle clearly revealed that Meng Hao's cultivation base had been restored, and furthermore, showed that his extermination of the Black Soul Society had not been a fluke, nor had he used some special method to make it happen. It wasn't something that could only happen once. He truly possessed that level of power. The slaughtering was instantly reduced, and yet there were still people chasing him. The main difference was that immortal realm cultivators no longer joined in, and the weakest people were in the great circle of the ancient realm. The main strength came in the form of Tao Realm cultivators. In the entire Heaven God Alliance, there were only a few dozen Tao Realm cultivators, about 30% of which were now participating in the search. However, because of the deadly way Meng Hao was fighting back against his pursuers, the Heaven God Alliance was no longer chasing him merely because of what had happened with the Black Soul Society. Apparently, an undispellable enmity now existed between them. In this, Meng Hao could not be blamed. The responsibility fell squarely on the shoulders of the Heaven God Alliance. Soon, the actual instances of death grew increasingly infrequent. It wasn't until 3 days later that several Dao Realm experts caught up with Meng Hao at the same time. After an intense battle was fought, Meng Hao was forced to flee. 5 days later, 2 more Dao Realm cultivators caught up with him. The battle was incredible, and both Dao Realm cultivators were heavily injured. However, so was Meng Hao, who was again forced to flee. Currently, Meng Hao was staggering along somewhere near the border of the Heaven God Alliance. Blood oozed out of his mouth, and yet his eyes shone with cold light. He looked like a lone wolf. His injuries were serious, and his eternal stratum was hard at work. It had been less than a month, and he had been in numerous intense fights, the most recent of which had all been fights with the Dao realm. One essence or 2 essences were one thing, but if they teamed up, things got difficult. That was not even to mention what happened when a Dao Lord appeared. After all, Meng Hao wasn't even in the Dao realm himself. There must be something on me that they can sense, but what? They're constantly locking onto my position. Ever since I left planet Luo River, they've been tracking me down so quickly. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent. Suddenly, he stopped in place and looked up ahead at something that had just appeared out in the inky blackness of the void. Brightly glowing rifts. Rifts in between which floated dust and rubble. There weren't many of them, only a total of 33, and they formed together into a very peculiar shape that resembled the vicious face of a ghost, floating there in the starry sky. For some reason, Meng Hao got the feeling that the ghost face was looking at him. He even caught wind of what sounded like endless screams echoing out from tombs. His face fell, and he began to back up. As he did, he couldn't help but notice that the area encompassed by the ghost face was expanding. It was now larger than when he had first seen it, by about 30%. An arcane pocket realm, he thought, studying the ghost face. For some reason, looking at the ghost face filled him with a sense of intangible danger. He quickly pulled out the map Jade slipped from the Righteous Noble sect and examined it carefully. Unfortunately, there was no information whatsoever about anything special in this area. Something's off, he thought, frowning. After looking again at the rapidly expanding ghost face and then back at the map Jade slip, his brow furrowed deeper. The map was very detailed and was a rare item that only conclave disciples of the Righteous Noble sect would have access to. There were even many asteroids marked on the map. According to the map, Meng Hao's current location should have had 7 asteroids which formed together in a small bazaar. Right now, though, there were no 7 asteroids to be seen, and the bazaar which had existed on them was also gone. As Meng Hao studied the situation, his scalp began to grow numb. Did they get swallowed up? He thought, looking over at the 33 glowing rifts and the dust and rubble floating there. He could well imagine that, previously, there really had been 7 asteroids in the bazaar, and naturally some cultivators would have been present too. However, these 33 glowing rifts had suddenly appeared and then swallowed up and destroyed everything in the area. This line of thinking caused Meng Hao's face to fall. Furthermore, the sensation of danger he felt grew even stronger. There was even an aura of death that gradually became quite apparent. The 8th mountain and sea is full of one grave after another. Could this also be some sort of gravesite? Without any hesitation, he backed up. This place seemed far too dangerous, so he decided to simply turn and leave. The following moment, though, before he had flown very far, he looked out into the starry sky and caught sight of a merchant ship heading in his direction. Just when he caught sight of it, the ship suddenly stopped in place. A complicated expression appeared on Meng Hao's face as he noticed the magical symbols on the side of the ship, which formed together into the character Meng Chinese letter. The Meng clan. This was his first time seeing anyone from the Meng clan in the 8th mountain and sea. He had never imagined that it would be under these circumstances. Looking away, he made to leave again, when suddenly, a bright shield of light appeared around the ship, apparently a defensive spell formation. Simultaneously, several figures flew out from the ship to stare at Meng Hao. One of them was a young man, handsome although somewhat pallid. He looked weak, as if from excessive drinking. He wore fine silks and had a jade slip in his hand. As soon as he caught sight of Meng Hao, his face lit up and he crushed the jade slip. Meng Hao scanned the ship with divine sense and found that the highest cultivation bases among their number were 2 experts in the great circle of the ancient realm. One of them stood next to the young Meng clan cultivator, and the other flanked another young man, who was extremely skinny but had a cold gleam in his eyes. Meng Hao could kill all of these people very easily. even if they did have a defensive spell formation in place. When he saw the young man crush the jade slip, Meng Hao sighed. Then he turned, transforming into a beam of bright light that began to shoot off into the distance. But then the young man cried out, "Meng Hao, don't even dream about leaving. Get out there and stop him, all of you. I already notified the senior members of the Heaven God Alliance and they'll be here any moment. Stall Meng Hao." In response to the young man's words, a dozen or so cultivators flew out from the ship. They all looked very nervous, and yet even more nervous than they were the two cultivators in the great circle of the ancient realm. When they heard the young man's words, their faces fell. "Shut your mouth," one of the old men roared. "Moron," said the cold, skinny young man off to the side, his expression flickering with scorn. Chapter 12:30, Initial Contact with the Meng Clan. Chapter 12:31, Deadly Catastrophe. Meng Hao frowned and looked over at the Meng Clan cultivators who were charging toward him. All of them were in the immortal realm, and there was one who had clearly just achieved immortal ascension, a stage 1 immortal. They were trembling to man, looking at Meng Hao in abject terror. In fact, once Meng Hao swept his gaze over them, none of them seemed willing to advance. "What are you doing?" hollered the young man, furious. "Get out there! Don't let him get away!" The old man standing off to the side saw Meng Hao looking his way. Trembling, he gritted his teeth and slapped his hand onto the back of the young man's head. The young man instantly went limp and fainted. The old man quickly hurried forward, then clasped hands and bowed deeply to Meng Hao. "Senior, our clan's young master doesn't understand how the world works. This was clearly just a case of mistaken identity. Senior, please forgive us. Well, we'll be on our way now." Then he nervously called for all the clan members to return to the ship, after which it slowly began to back up. Meng Hao could see the beads of sweat on the old man's face, and could tell how nervous he was. Clearly, he now hated the young man even more than he had before. The young man had instantly identified Meng Hao, and so had his Tao protector. However, as soon as the old man thought about how Meng Hao had exterminated the Heaven God Alliance's Black Soul Society, and then killed so many of his pursuers, even Tao realm experts, his heart trembled. Brainless moron. I really don't understand why the clan cares about him so much. I can't believe he intentionally provoked that jinx. There was someone else on the ship who was looking at Meng Hao, his face pale. He seemed to be hesitating, as if something had just occurred to him that he wished to speak out loud, but didn't qualify to do so. He was also a young man, wearing the clothes of a royal bodyguard. His face was crisscrossed with numerous scars that stretched down his neck and even further. Apparently, those scars ran across his entire body, and he looked to be in a weakened state. Meng Hao looked over at the cultivators of the Meng clan. He would never have imagined that his initial encounter with them would have been like this. He glanced at the young, unconscious youth and realized that he must be someone very special to the Meng clan. Otherwise, he wouldn't have the level of power he did. However, the fact that he was such an idiot caused Meng Hao to feel a bit disappointed in the Meng clan. However, because it was his mother's clan and his grandfather's, he had special feelings for them. Therefore, he didn't allow what had happened to leave him with a very bad impression. He had planned all along to go visit the Meng clan while he was in the 8th mountain, to see what it was like, and also to make contact with the members of his grandfather's bloodline. As he watched the ship moving off into the distance, he sighed, then looked away and made to leave. But then his eyes flickered as he looked off in a different direction. "Well, since you're here, why not show yourself?" he said calmly. As soon as the words left his mouth, the void off in the distance distorted and 3 people emerged. The first was a ruddy-faced boy wearing a white robe. He held his hands clasped behind his back and had a third eye on his forehead. His expression was icy, and the third eye blinked constantly, simultaneously radiating a mysterious light as he walked forward. Shocking ripples radiated out from him in all directions, causing the natural laws in the starry sky to be shoved away. Essence power built up, like a drawn arrow ready to be loosed. "Tao Lord," Meng Hao thought, pupils constricting. The second person was an old woman, her face covered with bulging pustules. Every step she took caused her to tremble, as if she were so old she might die at any moment. However, she brimmed with vibrant life force that made her seem like an eternally inextinguishable flame. When the old woman saw Meng Hao, piercing, screeching laughter erupted from her mouth, as if she were looking at a dead man. The third person was none other than Patriarch Black Soul. He looked different now. Obviously, he had possessed a new fleshly body. However, his soul aura and his venomous hatred for Meng Hao made him instantly identifiable. "Listen up, child," the white-robed boy said. I'm Xianxia from the One Profound sect on planet Profound Turtle. The boy's voice was not loud, and yet it seemed to rumble out in all directions like thunder. 1. Xianxia's name in Chinese shares the character Qian with the name of the sect. It can be translated a lot of ways, including profound, black, mysterious, and can be combined with another character to become Qianwu turtle. If you read Against the Gods, you've seen this character translated as profound on more than one occasion. As soon as Meng Hao heard him mention the One Profound sect, his eyes widened. Of the 4 planets in the 8th mountain and sea, Meng Hao had heard of planet Luo River as well as planet Profound Turtle. As for the One Profound sect, they were the #1 sect on planet Profound Turtle. They occupied a very high position and were ranked among the top 5 forces in the Heaven God Alliance. Next to speak was the old woman, whose voice was hoarse as she smiled and said, "And I'm Hong Chen, from the Church of the Dragon God on Planet 8 Designs." Her expression was completely vicious, and when she smiled, one of the pustules on her face popped. No liquid emerged. Instead, a milky white centipede crawled out from the broken flesh, its legs writhing in a shocking fashion. When Meng Hao looked at this Hong Chen, his heart sank a bit. Planet 8 Designs was also one of the 4 great planets in the 8th mountain and sea. As for the Church of the Dragon God, it was even more powerful than the One Profound sect, and was one of the unflappable top 3 sects in the Heaven God Alliance. Clearly, these 2 sects had been recruited by Patriarch Black Soul. If they succeeded in the venture, and thus obtained the services of Patriarch Black Soul, then the sect's power would increase by an entire level. The One Profound sect would then be able to compete directly with the Church of the Dragon God, and as for the Church of the Dragon God, they would then be just as glorious as the second-ranking force in the Alliance, the Godchild Society. As soon as these 3 powerful experts appeared, the Meng clan ship suddenly stopped moving. By this point, their young leader had regained consciousness and had ordered the ship to be stopped. Now, he was staring at Meng Hao with glittering eyes, and his Tao protector was doing nothing to hold him back. People exist everywhere who hope to take advantage of a crisis for personal gain, and the Meng clan was no exception. "I'm Meng Hao," he said in introduction. Even if he had faced these 3 almighty Tao lords of the senior generation back when he was uninjured, he still would have been killed. Therefore, there was no need to even mention what a fight now would be like, considering that he was seriously injured. In fact, even facing one of them would be quite difficult for him. However, he still wasn't willing to lose his pride, and therefore, when Hong Chen and Xianxia formally introduced themselves, naturally, he did the same. As for where he came from, it was sufficient that they were aware of the facts. There was no need for him to state it himself. Patriarch Black Soul glared at Meng Hao, eyes brimming with intense hatred. Meng Hao had destroyed his entire existence, and now he wished to do the same to Meng Hao. "Meng Hao," Patriarch Black Soul said, his voice booming like thunder. "Echelon cultivator from the 9th mountain and sea, what a high status. But not here, here you're nothing." Something else happened that nobody noticed, not even Patriarch Black Soul, or perhaps he didn't deign to care. On the Meng clan's ship, the scar-faced young bodyguard trembled in response to the words. Then his eyes began to shine with a bright light as he looked out at Meng Hao. However, the light in his eyes quickly faded, as if whatever matter had occurred to him moments before was really an impossibility. Nobody noticed this happen. All of the cultivators on the Meng clan ship were paying close attention to what was likely about to develop into a deadly Tao realm battle. Rumbling filled the air as Patriarch Black Soul began to stride forward. He waved his right hand, causing countless souls to silently materialize. Essence power also rocked out, causing the starry sky to tremble as it all bore down on Meng Hao. Anyone under the Tao realm who faced a deadly attack like this would be destroyed in a single attack, regardless of the level of their cultivation base. But Meng Hao was an all-heaven Tao immortal, and his fleshly body was in the great circle of the ancient realm. Because of that, despite not being in the Tao realm, he could definitely match up with Tao realm cultivators. Meng Hao's face was calm, although he really had no other choice but to remain calm. Any sort of emotion was useless at this point. This fight was going to happen, therefore. How to fight, how to defend, how to counterattack, and all other aspects of the battle were decided by Meng Hao in an instant. He suddenly flickered into motion, raising his right hand to summon numerous immortal mountains, and even the Paragon Bridge, which descended toward Patriarch Black Soul to block his path. When their divine abilities met, a tremor ran through Meng Hao, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. However, his eyes flickered as he suddenly borrowed the force of the blow to shoot backward, toward the 33 glowing rifts that he had seen earlier. After observing the area earlier, he knew that it contained vast dangers and that they were places where there was virtually nothing but death. But he was in a similarly deadly situation right now. Furthermore, when two deadly situations like this slammed into each other, it was possible that the explosive result would not necessarily be death, but an elusive chance to live. The people in the Meng clan could take advantage of a crisis for personal gain, so naturally, Meng Hao could too. In the moment that Meng Hao fell back, Patriarch Black Soul was rocked by the Paragon Bridge. However, even as the blood oozed out of his mouth, the white-robed Chuan Dayazi suddenly laughed, blurring away and then rematerializing right next to Meng Hao. "Get back here, child," he said coolly, reaching out with his right hand to grab Meng Hao. Next, it was as if his hand transformed into a black hole, causing the starry sky to reverse its movement and time to run backward. Even the Meng clan's ship was affected, and began to emit creaking sounds as it began to tilt over on its side as it was sucked towards him. Seeing that he was about to be grabbed, Meng Hao suddenly laughed coldly and began to walk. He was using the time-walking technique taught to him by the black-robed figure named Slaughter. 1 step, 2 step, 3 steps. Meng Hao stepped through time, seemingly moving slowly, and yet, despite the fact that Xuan Dayazi's palm was causing time to flow in reverse, Meng Hao was still able to walk forward. This was using time to fight time. A brief moment later, and Meng Hao was already off in the distance, leaving Xuan Dayazi standing there gaping. In all his years of cultivation, this was the first time anyone had defeated his essence magic in such a fashion. His eyes began to shine brightly with disbelief as he watched Meng Hao, and especially the way he was walking. What walking technique is that? It contains a Tao of time that's even more profound than my own. Chapter 12:32. Essence stirs only for the Deosaurs. As soon as Xuan Dayazi saw Meng Hao's walking technique, his own essence of time suddenly began to boil with thirst. It was a feeling that he had never, ever experienced before. It took only a moment for the reaction of the essence to grow stronger and cause him to begin to tremble with excitement. My essence is moving, thirsting. This matter is something which is mentioned in the histories. Heavens, I can't believe I've encountered something that exists only in legends. Where did this Meng Hao's walking technique come from? It can actually stir my essence up and cause it to exhibit a powerful thirst. My essence wishes to absorb the Tao of time in that walking technique. If I can gain enlightenment of it, then my own essence of time could potentially progress another step and form a sliver of the Deosaurs. According to the legends, essence stirs only for the Deosaurs. The Deosaurs is something so mysterious that only almighty Tao sovereigns can possibly grope for understanding of it. Only the legendary paragons could actually aspire to such supreme heights. Xuan Dayazi's eyes were wide, and his heart was pounding in excitement. To Tao realm experts, essence was only the beginning. It was the destination of their journey, and yet it was another starting point. That starting point was actually where the vast majority of Tao realm cultivators would be stuck for the rest of their lives. They searched for more enlightenment in order to possess more essences, and thus reach the absolute pinnacle. The first pinnacle was a 3 essences Tao Lord, above which was the Tao Sovereign, and anyone who possessed 7 essences could rightly be termed a paragon. In truth, though, there was even something that not all Tao realm cultivators understood. Only certain Tao Lords and Tao Sovereigns had heard that becoming a paragon was not the absolute peak of cultivation. For example, Paragon 9 Seals had 9 great essences, and yet, as strong as he eventually died. Beyond the 9 essences paragon, there was the Deosaurus realm. Actually, no one even knew whether the Deosaurus realm was real or not. After all, from ancient times until now, be it in the times of the Paragon Immortal realm or the current Mountain and Sea realm, the entire immortal world had never produced a single Deosaurus realm cultivator. There were only stories and legends which said that the key to the Deosaurus realm was that essence stirs merely for the Deosaurs. The Deosaurs, this is definitely the legendary Deosaurs. This is the first time since stepping into the Tao realm that one of my essences has moved. Xuan Dayazi looked at Meng Hao for a moment and then suddenly shot after him. His action was not taken on behalf of his sect, which had been recruited by Patriarch Black Soul. Rather, he was doing this for himself. When he thought about the fact that not even the legendary paragons could touch the Deosaurs, Xuan Dayazi went wild with joy. However, there was someone else who reacted even faster. In almost the exact same moment that Meng Hao used the special time-traveling walking technique, Hong Chen laughed, a hoarse, grating laugh. Suddenly, she waved her finger, causing 7 of the pustules on her face to pop. 7 milky white centipedes then shot toward Meng Hao. "Dragon God, your presence is requested." Hong Chen's eyes glittered coldly, and as soon as the words left her mouth, the 7 centipedes swirled around each other, as if they were forming some bizarre spell formation. A shocking aura began to radiate off of them, and at the same time, an enormous illusory figure appeared, surrounding the centipedes. That figure was not a dragon but rather a huge centipede that was fully 3,000 meters long. As soon as it appeared, the starry sky shattered. The dragon god roared and then lunged toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's heart was pounding. The dragon god was bearing down on him, and Chuan Daozi was closing in rapidly. At this critical moment, Meng Hao was incapable of dodging. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, causing the Paragon Bridge to appear. As he proceeded along using his time-walking technique, immortal mountains descended, around which swirled a sun and a moon. The full power of an all-heaven Tao immortal also exploded out. The meat jelly appeared, forming a suit of armor. The copper mirror materialized into the battle weapon. The mastiff transformed into a cape. The 4th nirvana fruit appeared, which Meng Hao pushed into his forehead. It all happened in the blink of an eye, causing Meng Hao's energy to spike dramatically. He waved his hand viciously, causing the starry sky to tremble. Even the Meng clan's ship began to vibrate, and its protective shield shattered. Numerous disciples of the Meng clan coughed up blood. The dragon god let out a miserable howl as it collapsed into pieces. Chuan Daozi stopped his frenzied pursuit and waved his sleeve, causing his cultivation base to erupt with a powerful attack. Patriarch Black Soul also roared as he went on the offensive. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as the Paragon Bridge was sent spinning away. The mountains collapsed and the sun and moon shattered. The meat jelly armor fell to pieces, the battle weapon faded away, and the cape reverted back into the mastiff, which spewed out blood. Meng Hao's 4th nirvana fruit was forced out of him, and Meng Hao was rapidly enveloped by a mist of his own blood. He appeared to have been seriously injured, and as he continued to flee, it was even possible to see shattered bones in the mangled mass of flesh that was his chest. "Die!" cried Hong Chen, killing intent flickering in her eyes as she advanced directly toward Meng Hao. Patriarch Black Soul unleashed his most powerful essence magic as he attacked Meng Hao gleefully. Chuan Daozi's face suddenly flickered. "Don't kill him," he barked, stepping forward to intervene. Rumbling filled the air as he blocked the attacks of both Hong Chen and Patriarch Black Soul, who then glared at him angrily. "Chuan Daozi, what are you doing?" "Fellow Taoist Chuan Daozi, you're blocking me. What is the meaning of this?" Hong Chen and Patriarch Black Soul both stared at Chuan Daozi, eyes aflame with rage. "I need him," Chuan Daozi explained immediately. "Keep him alive, and after I'm done with him, then you can kill him. I'll even owe the both of you a big favor." His words immediately caused the faces of Patriarch Black Soul and Hong Chen to soften. Meng Hao took advantage of their brief moment of interaction to fall back even further. His face was pale, and his cultivation base had plummeted. In fact, the extent of the injuries were far greater than the ones he sustained when he had attacked the Black Soul Society. He was only a single person facing 3 Tao Lords, and he wasn't even truly in the Tao realm himself. He wasn't their match to begin with, and now he didn't even have time to flee into the 33 glowing rifts. Off in the distance, everyone on the Meng clan ship had been injured. As for the young lord, he wiped the blood off of his mouth, and his eyes flickered with greed. "I want his place in the echelon," the young man roared. "Go, all of you get out there and kill him," although none of the other Meng clan disciples actually did anything. Strange gleams could be seen in their eyes as they stared at Meng Hao, as if they were a pack of wolves staring at an injured tiger. It was only the scar-faced young man who was apparently unable to conceal the concern he felt, and looked somewhat anxious. Currently, Meng Hao was in full retreat. Chuan Daozi and the other 2 Tao Realm experts had come to an agreement and looked over at him, killing intent swirling. They closed in, completely ignoring how distasteful it was for the powerful to bully the weak, or for people to gang up on others. Meng Hao chuckled bitterly. He had no Taoist magics which could block their attacks. He even tried to use the Paragon's blood inside of him to summon the light of the mountain and sea realm's sun and moon, to no avail. "I guess I was a bit too reckless after all," he murmured. "However, I don't regret anything, although it's a real pity that I won't be able to get Kinger back or save Chu Yuyan." Meng Hao sighed as the 3 Tao Realm experts bore down on him. However, it was at this point that a tremor ran through him, and his eyes suddenly began to shine with a bright light. Wait, I actually do have one more Taoist magic. He suddenly looked up and gritted his teeth. Then, he bent his legs into a circle and lifted his right arm in front of his face. "The Tao is in my heart," he roared. Instantly, the starry sky went completely silent, as if all noise had been consumed. In fact, any noise that was emitted was completely wiped away. Within that stifling silence, an incredible pressure suddenly weighed down. Chuan Daozi's face fell, Hong Chen's eyes went wide, and Patriarch Blacksoul gaped in shock. All three of them were Tao lords and were keenly in tune with heaven, earth, and the starry sky. All of a sudden, they could sense a will descending, something that caused their hearts to tremble with intense fear. Meng Hao was also shaking. As he roared the words, his divine sense spread out. Although he had practiced this magical technique with the Taoist priest over and over again, nothing like this had ever happened. Suddenly, hope flared up within him, burning strong and bright. Deep in his heart, obsession and faith melded together. As of this moment, he firmly believed that the Seal the Heavens incantation would definitely catalyze the mountain and sea realm into motion. He couldn't sense the pressure in the area as he was completely immersed in a bizarre state. It was as if he had become the world, as if he was the eighth mountain and sea, as if he was the will of the entire mountain and sea realm. When it came to the words, "The Tao is in my heart," Meng Hao viewed that Tao to be the entire mountain and sea realm. The mountain and sea realm was in his heart. "The will is in my eyes." His left arm rose up to a horizontal position, and together with his right arm, it formed the character Chinese letter, covering his eyes and making it impossible for him to see the world in front of him. However, what it could not cover over was his heart and his will. The truth is that on many occasions, it is only when you close your eyes, when you completely cover your field of vision, when you can see absolutely nothing, that you can truly feel the world. That was exactly what Meng Hao was experiencing right now. He could feel the 9 mountains and 9 seas within the starry sky, and he could also sense the sun and the moon. He began to tremble as his perception completely filled the entire mountain and sea realm without hindrance of any kind. His will was now the will of the mountains and seas, and his mind became the mind of the mountains and seas. Even the Taoist priest could never have predicted that Meng Hao would be able to so easily unleash the Seal the Heavens incantation. In fact, it was so easy that it was almost as if it were a heavenly magic that had been prepared specifically for him. Believe yourself to be the Lord of the mountains and seas, and seal the 33 heavens. However, if you actually were the Lord of the mountains and seas, then the magic would be unimaginably powerful. Meng Hao was shaking as he shifted his legs to form the shape of a mountain. Then he stretched his hands wide, as if to embrace the entire world. "I shall possess the mountains and seas, seal the heavens. Incantation," he roared. 1. As I mentioned before, the previous use of the word exhaust was incorrect. The Chinese characters involved are confusing because they can be interpreted in several different ways. In the end, the structure of this part is based on an old Chinese poem, which makes the correct interpretation clear when you understand that poem. I'll go back to change the previous instances later. In that instant, the starry sky trembled and the world shook. The mountain and sea realm's 9 seas roared and the 9 mountains shook violently. The sun and moon vibrated. Everything was shining dazzlingly. The mountains and seas were completely rocked. It was only in this place, and only Meng Hao who could, begin the initial sealing of the heavens. Expand. As Meng Hao widened his arms, the starry sky in front of him distorted, and a gigantic blurry figure suddenly appeared, which instantly charged forward. Massive, shocking ripples emanated out that could shake heaven and earth. Patriarch Blacksoul charged toward it, letting out a powerful shout and raising his arms up, unleashing the full power of his essences. A huge boom could be heard as his body was shredded to pieces, causing Patriarch Blacksoul to once again let out a roar. The chunks of blood and flesh which appeared quickly turned black, and in the blink of an eye had formed into countless souls which carried Patriarch Blacksoul away at top speed. However, the giant was still on the offensive. Miserable shrieks could be heard coming from Patriarch Blacksoul's souls. In the blink of an eye, the souls collapsed, and Patriarch Blacksoul was killed in body and spirit. The grand and magnificent Patriarch Blacksoul first had his sect destroyed, and then was himself cut down. None of the souls escaped. All were completely exterminated by the Seal the Heavens incantation. As the destruction was carried out, and Patriarch Blacksoul was wiped from existence, the last thing that echoed in his mind was a voice that only he and Meng Hao could hear. "The mountains and seas loathe you. Punishment, execution." However, the seal the heavens incantation wasn't finished. The giant next charged toward Hong Chen, emanating massive pressure, sending out shocking and terrifying ripples, carrying with it the will of the mountain and sea realm. Hong Chen's face was deathly pale. She had just personally witnessed Patriarch Black Soul's death, and considering the level of her cultivation base, she had never imagined that Meng Hao, being seriously injured, would unexpectedly unleash a magical technique like this. In fact, it seemed impossible to her that a cultivator could even utilize such magic. When she looked at the enormous giant, she could sense the will of the entire mountain and sea realm. "Impossible," she screamed, backing up as fast as possible. "This is impossible." However, she realized she simply had no way to escape. Roaring, she performed an incantation gesture, causing her cultivation base to surge. Essence power rumbled and all of the pustules on her face burst, causing countless milky white centipedes to shoot out toward the giant. They screeched as they formed together into a dragon god that was over 100,000 meters long. Surging with energy, it shot toward the incoming giant, and when they slammed into each other, the dragon god screamed. In the blink of an eye, it vanished, having been completely pulverized by the giant. Hong Chen trembled, looking on in despair as her dragon god was completely shattered. All of her milky white centipedes were killed, transformed into nothing but ash. Blood sprayed out of her mouth, her body was lacerated into shreds, and her clothes were ripped apart. When her wrinkled skin was revealed, it was suddenly possible to see a totem tattoo. It was none other than a dragon god totem. It began to shine with a brilliant light, and a dragon god once again appeared. This time, it was just as large as the previous one, but much less illusory. Instantly, it bared its claws and fangs, then shot toward the giant. However, even as it roared, it was completely engulfed by the giant's attack and was killed. That in turn caused Hong Chen's totem tattoo to be wiped away. Instantly, her aura weakened, and her cultivation base dropped down from the level of a Tao Lord. Simultaneously, a voice suddenly echoed out in both her mind and Meng Hao's. "You have cultivated the magic of the outsiders. Since you were born in the mountains and seas, your life will not be taken. Only the bloodline of the outsiders which you possess will be destroyed." Blood sprayed out of Hong Chen's mouth, and her face turned ashen. The giant then ignored her, spinning to charge Xuan Daozi. Xuan Daozi's eyes widened, and he backed up as fast as possible. However, try as he might, he was unable to escape the giant's charge. Just as the giant was about to reach out and crush him, he lifted his right hand, within which appeared a command medallion. It was ancient, primeval, as if it had existed for countless years. It was engraved on the front with 9 mountains and 9 seas. On the back were ancient magical symbols which read, "9 seals." As soon as the command medallion appeared, Xuan Daozi screamed. "My ancestor once performed meritorious service and was given this death exemption medallion by Paragon 9 Seals himself. You can't hurt me." After a pause, a voice echoed out into the minds of Meng Hao and Xia Daozi. "Authorized." Xuan Daozi was trembling, and fear lingered in his heart as the command medallion transformed into ash. The giant's attack still blasted out, but didn't harm him at all. When the command medallion turned into ash, Xuan Daozi's heart twinged with pain. Next, the giant swiveled and charged toward the Meng clan's merchant ship, from within which could be heard screams of terror. As soon as the giant turned on the Meng clan, Meng Hao suddenly got extremely anxious. Although he could unleash the seal the heavens incantation, he actually couldn't control it. If he could, then he would definitely have wiped out Xuan Daozi and Hong Chen. The truth was, this magic had a will of its own. Once that will awoke, it wished to cleanse and purify all living things within the mountain and sea realm. Rumbling could be heard as the first attack hit the merchant ship. Although it didn't harm the ship, the cultivators aboard let out miserable shrieks, evidently receiving some sort of punishment. Although these members of the Meng clan had eyed Meng Hao greedily earlier, they were still members of the Meng clan. Meng Hao had no wish to see them destroyed. Besides, showing a bit of greed was no justification for the death penalty. Even more importantly, they weren't even aware of his own connection to the Meng clan. His eyes widened as the giant's attack once again threatened to overwhelm the ship, and suddenly he forcibly reined the Taoist magic in. He dropped his arms, causing his body to shudder and a mouthful of blood to spray out. His body weakened further, but he still forced the magic back in check. The seal the heavens incantation seemed to be sucking away, not at his body, but at his soul. As he pulled the magic back in, the giant turned and looked in his direction. In that moment, rumbling filled his mind, and it felt as if the giant bore his own countenance. He didn't take the time to analyze the matter. As soon as the giant vanished, he unhesitatingly shot backward. Wounding himself even more in the process, he employed his top speed to shoot toward the region with the 33 glowing rifts. He was still going to enter that land of potential death. That was because, the instant the giant vanished, Hong Chen and Xuandaozi began to chase him once more, venomous expressions on their faces. Xuandaozi was a bit faster than Hong Chen. In the blink of an eye, he was bearing down on Meng Hao. Meng Hao quickly transformed into an azure rock, which increased the distance between them with a rumbling burst of speed. Xuandaozi snorted coldly and was about to speed up himself, when suddenly he stopped in his tracks. The shock and terror on his face right now was no less than when he had faced the Seal the Heavens incantation. It wasn't just him. Hong Chen also stopped in her tracks, face flickering as she stared off into the distance and cried, "That's the 33 hells." The area encompassed by the 33 glowing rifts was even larger than before, and had almost reached the area they were in. Meng Hao in azure rock form didn't pause for a moment as he shot into that very area. 33 hells. So the 33 hells are opening again. This is just the initial opening. According to the records of the past, the 33 hells can appear anywhere in the 8th mountain and sea. Once they do, there is an unknown, varying period of time before they become fully opened. It is not until they are fully opened that they are at their most dangerous, and even Dao sovereigns can be killed inside. Even now, during the initial opening, the place is still very dangerous. Damn it, the 33 hells. They go tens of thousands of years without opening once. How could there be such a coincidence that they're opening here and now? Xuandaozi stared at Meng Hao. Were it not for the fact that his essence had been so intensely moved, Xuandaozi wouldn't have hesitated to turn around and leave. After Patriarch Blacksoul perished, he could not become the slave of any sect or individual, therefore trying to kill Meng Hao held little meaning. However, the possibility of getting that sliver of Dao essence had wrapped around Xuandaozi's heart. After a moment, he clenched his jaw and then headed directly toward the 33 hells. Time to gamble. If I succeed, I might be able to get a bit of Daosaurus. Even the tiniest bit would still be worth it. If I fail, considering the level of my cultivation base, and that this is only the initial opening of the 33 hells, I won't necessarily perish. Having made up his mind, he shot forward at top speed. Hong Chen's face flickered, and uncertainty could be seen in her eyes. The legends about the 33 hells had always been talked about in the 8th mountain and sea. Supposedly, there were 33 heavens sealing the mountain and sea realm from above. However, there were also 33 hells, although they were not seals but graves. Back during the Great War between the Paragon Immortal Realm and the other two terrifying forces, there were certain outsiders who could not be completely exterminated. In fact, among those, there were some who were so strong that their bodies could not be destroyed even after dying. Despite having been killed, they weren't really dead. Since their souls could not be destroyed, they were instead suppressed, and that was the origin of the 33 hells. According to the legends, the 33 hells were jointly created by the three paragons of past times. Paragon 9 seals took the lead in suppressing those outsiders who could be killed in body but not soul. The 33 hells were essentially a terrifying cage. Those 33 glowing rifts represented 33 graveyards, and they, in turn, represented the 33 terrifying outsiders of yesteryear who had been suppressed. The reason the 33 hells opened up every so often was not to give people a chance to enter and explore them, but rather that the sealing power inside would grow weak. Every so often, the 33 hells needed time to replenish their power before sinking once again into concealment. However, in the process of being opened, it was possible for people to enter them and even seek good fortune inside. Such good fortune might be great or small, and truth be told, few people knew as much about the good fortune of the 33 hells as Hong Chen. That was because the Church of the Dragon God had once been a small sect. Back then, it hadn't even been called the Church of the Dragon God. However, because one of the patriarchs of that sect had happened to enter the 19th hell and encounter a dragon god, he was able to accept a legacy. That led to the formation of the Church of the Dragon God. The 33 hells are opening, she thought, gritting her teeth. Another storm of carnage is coming to the 8th mountain and sea. Her cultivation base had dropped, and she was now no longer a Dao Lord. In fact, she had also lost the power of the Dragon God. She had truly been weakened significantly. However, considering that Xuandaozi had charged on ahead, her eyes flickered and she also headed in the direction of the 33 hells. She was not going for Meng Hao, though, but rather the potential good fortune inside. Right after Xuan Daozi and Hong Chen flew toward the area of the 33 Hells, the Meng clan's ship began to move. The young lord on board was very excited. "Follow them, all of you. Go. I'll wait for you here to bring back some good fortune from the 33 Hells. I don't care what good fortune it is, just bring it back here and you'll get a huge reward. Huge. Damn it, get out there, all of you. If anyone refuses to go, then when we get back to the clan, I'll report you to the clan priest. 11th uncle, you stay out here to protect me, but everyone else, you get in there." The young man's direct order caused the dozens of Meng clan cultivators to tremble as they flew in the direction of the 33 Hells. One of those cultivators was the scar-faced youth Meng Chen. 1. Meng Chen was introduced in Chapter 1221 and was mentioned a few times since then, although not in name. He seems to have some clue about who Meng Hao is. Chapter 1233, Initial Opening of the 33 Hells. Chapter 1234, Greed Eyes a Body. Meng Hao moved with incredible speed, bursting into the region of the 33 Hells, with Xuan Daozi and Hong Chen hot in pursuit. Soon, all three were speeding through the area near the rifts, which was permeated with an aura of death. Meng Hao's eyes flickered coldly. He had chosen to enter this deathly region, and as such was prepared for the deadly nature of the area. After looking around, he couldn't be sure, but it seemed that only 4 or 5 of the 33 glowing rifts could be entered. Apparently the others were as yet unopened. However, his eyes didn't betray the slightest sign of hesitation, as he shot directly toward the nearest completely opened rift. It almost looked like a gaping mouth that sucked in life and breathed out death. As soon as Meng Hao neared it, he vanished. Behind him, Xuan Daozi and Hong Chen gritted their teeth hard and then followed him in. Further on back were the various trembling members of the Meng clan. They only had immortal realm cultivation bases, so any young lord who had a brain would never ask them to participate in a struggle between Dao realm experts. However, this young master of the Meng clan, who was referred to as a young lord, had given clear orders. Anyone who refused to comply would be severely punished once they returned to the clan. Therefore, they could only grit their teeth and risk life and limb. There was no backing out, and therefore, it was with grieving, bloodshot eyes that they flew into the shining rift, one after another. Not long after everyone followed Meng Hao into the 33 Hells, a collection of white bones suddenly rumbled in the same direction from off in the starry sky. They moved with incredible speed, and eventually came to a stop not far from the Meng clan ship, revealing the figures that had been barely visible inside before. All of them had completely expressionless faces and radiated powerful murderous auras. When the young lord on the Meng clan's ship saw the bones, his face flickered. Han Kingley. The old man standing off to the side stepped forward protectively, and the ship's shield was activated. Both of them looked nervously at the bones and the black-robed young man who sat in their midst, chin resting on his hand. This was none other than the echelon cultivator from the 8th mountain, Han Kingley. "Meng clan," he said, eyes flickering with killing intent as he glanced first at the Meng clan's ship and then the 33 Hells. "Where is Meng Hao?" he asked coolly, his voice echoing out in all directions. The Meng clan's young lord began to tremble. He could act fiercely toward his own clan members and behave arrogantly in front of Meng Hao, but that was only because he didn't know the difference between heaven and earth. When it came to Han Kingley, though, he was instantly filled with dread. The person to respond to Han Kingley was the young lord's Dao protector. "Meng Hao went into that area over there," he said. He was a cautious man who was well aware that Han Kingley could not be underestimated. He was also aware of the deadly enmity which existed between Han Kingley and the Meng clan. The initial opening of the 33 Hells. Han Kingley frowned as he examined the 33 glowing rifts closely. Finally, an expression of determination appeared in his eyes. Uncharacteristically ignoring the Meng clan's ship, he sent the bones flying toward the 33 Hells. All of his followers once again turned blurry as they clustered around him to follow. Time passed. Several hours later, more beams of light could be seen flying through the starry sky in the area, which were cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance. They had come in pursuit of Meng Hao, but once they realized that the 33 Hells had appeared, cries of shock could be heard, and Jade slips were pulled out to inform their sex. It didn't take long for the shocking news to spread throughout the Heaven God Alliance, and soon countless cultivators were flocking to the area. One powerful expert after another arrived. After all, the 33 Hells. were the most mysterious and enigmatic place in the entire Eighth Mountain and Sea. In fact, they might even be the most mysterious and enigmatic place in the mountain and sea realm as a whole. The opening of the 33 Hells was something that would shake the entire Eighth Mountain and Sea. Soon, more and more cultivators had gathered in the area. However, few people actually dared to enter. Apparently, Meng Hao wasn't even that important anymore. What was more important was the good fortune to be had in the 33 Hells. //. As soon as Meng Hao entered the world of that glowing rift which was the 33 Hells, he was cut off from the outside world. He was in another world, a world where everything was gray and filled with a boundless aura of death. Rubble could be seen everywhere, as well as numerous decaying shades who shuffled about blankly, occasionally letting out howls and roars. The powerful aura of death was concentrated enough to extinguish one's life force. As soon as Meng Hao entered this world, he could sense it, and his skin began to gradually wither. His life force slowly began to decay, and apparently not even his eternal stratum was useful. His injuries worsened. Off in the distance, an enormous stone stele could be seen rising up into the air. Despite how far away it was, Meng Hao could still see the faint characters written on its surface. Sealing Paramita, exalted celestial Sidao rests here, where his soul shall be suppressed for all time. The characters were filled with a powerfully domineering air, and the stone stele itself seemed to form the center of this entire world. It was almost as if it was the only seal holding this world in place. Underneath all of those characters, a name could be seen. 9 Seals. When Meng Hao saw that, his mind began to tremble, and the drop of Paragon's blood inside of him began to boil. It transformed into qi and blood that filled Meng Hao, causing his heart to begin to beat in resonance with the world itself. Ba-dump, ba-dump. As his heart pounded, the lands around him shook, and at the same time the shades shuffling around suddenly stopped in place and looked up at him. It was in that exact moment that rumbling could be heard coming from behind him as Xuan Daozi and Hong Chen arrived. Meng Hao, it doesn't matter that you fled to this place, you're dead, Xuan Daozi shrieked, flying directly toward Meng Hao. Killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes. Ignoring how it increased his injuries, he gritted his teeth and transformed into an azure rock, shooting toward the stone stele and causing rumbling sounds to fill the lands. He could just barely tell that something was beckoning to him from there. Meng Hao flew at top speed, and as he got closer to the stone stele, the Paragon's blood inside of him seethed even more. That in turn caused his wounds to begin to heal, much to Meng Hao's delight. Simultaneously, the shuffling shades down below suddenly began to shriek and fly into the air toward both Meng Hao and Xuan Daozi, as if to prevent them from getting close to the stone stele. That was the moment in which the clan members from the Meng clan began to appear, one after another, their faces pale with astonishment as they looked around. Massive rumbling could be heard as the rotting shades shot through the air. Some were cultivators and others were beasts, but all of them were adorned in a fashion that was clearly not from modern times. Obviously, they had been involved in the same ancient battle and had been buried alive in this place along with the one who was being suppressed here. Even as they neared Meng Hao, his eyes flashed as he fortuitously recalled something which had happened in the past. It was in the ruins of immortality in the 9th Mountain and Sea when he had encountered the 6th generation demon sealer. That was when he had learned the 6th demon sealing hex, the life-death hex. He clearly remembered how the 6th generation demon sealer had encountered entities similar to these, and had used the life-death hex to control them. There were many similarities between what happened back then and what was happening right now. The main difference was that this was the 33 Hells, and that had been in the ruins of immortality. Without any hesitation, Meng Hao waved his hand toward the incoming shades, eyes glittering as he unleashed the 6th hex. Dozens of magical symbols appeared in the palm of his hand, which radiated scintillating light. Suddenly, identical magical symbols appeared on the foreheads of all the entities charging Meng Hao. The entities then trembled as the magical symbols flickered in sync with Meng Hao's, then flew off of their foreheads toward him, where they converged on the palm of his hand. He then closed his hand into a fist and suddenly could sense the dozens of shades inside of his mind. And he could control them. The life-death hex had never been so easy to use, but Meng Hao didn't have time to think about it. He immediately sent out orders, causing the dozens of shades to howl, and then passed by Meng Hao to charge toward Xuan Daozi and Hong Chen. Xuan Daozi was completely shocked. He had no idea what kind of magical technique Meng Hao had just used, but he could see that the strange shades were completely ignoring him. Xuan Deazi's heart began to thump. Hong Chen had a similar reaction. Meng Hao didn't even look back at what was happening. He continued onward, putting more distance between him and them. However, he wasn't done with his counterattack. As soon as he started moving, he would unleash the life-death hexing seal on any entity he saw and send them all back to attack Xuan Deazi and Hong Chen. Soon, he was in the region of the stone steel, and had sent over 100 entities back to engage in fierce fighting with Xuan Deazi and Hong Chen. The entities had no regard for their own lives or deaths. They only followed instructions. Auras of death swirled around them as they fought with incredible fierceness. Even as the booms rang out, Meng Hao arrived at the base of the stone steel. When he looked up, he realized that the stone steel looked almost like an enormous staff, plunged deep into the earth. It was impossible to say how deep down it went. In either case, instead of saying that it was a stone steel, it would be better to say that it was an enormous gravestone. If it's a gravestone, Meng Hao murmured, then this place really is an enormous grave. Because of the call of the gravestone and the boiling paragon's blood, his cultivation base was being restored even faster. A bright glow appeared in his eyes. His injuries had been severe, so if he could recover here, he didn't care if it was because of the gravestone or even because of some ancient corpse. He quickly shot up into the air to appear moments later at the top of the gravestone, where he sat down cross-legged. As he sat down, the entire gravestone began to rumble, and the paragon's blood inside of him boiled with more intensity. Furthermore, his cultivation base was being fully restored at a terrifyingly fast speed. As he healed, he looked out coldly at all of the dozens of shades surrounding Xuan Deazi and Hong Chen, and his eyes gleamed with killing intent. Simultaneously, as he sat there cross-legged in the soil at the base of the gravestone, suddenly, two greedy eyes appeared which stared up at Meng Hao. It's been a long, long time since I've seen any living being in my world. Even when people came in from the outside and stood directly in front of me, I could never see them. But him, I can actually see him. A fresh, living body. Greed must have it. Chapter 1235, Counterattack. Meng Hao suddenly looked at the air behind him, frowned, and then looked down at the ground. He didn't know it, but those eyes beneath the surface were actually staring directly into his, although Meng Hao sensed nothing out of the ordinary. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He continued to ponder the strangeness of this place as he then looked back at Xuan Deazi and Hong Chen, surrounded by wave after wave of enemies. Then he continued cultivating to recover from his wounds. Behind him in the ground, the eyes narrowed. How shockingly perceptive. A body like this is perfectly suited for me. If I can possess it, then I can finally get out of this damn place. Time passed. Meng Hao's injuries continued to heal, and he was actually already half recovered. Booms rang out from the direction of Xuan Deazi and Hong Chen as more and more shades besieged them. Unexpectedly, some of those shades even emanated the ripples of the Dao realm, indicated that they had been Dao realm experts when they were alive. Their essence power had gradually faded, but their instincts remained, and due to the constant onslaught of that aura of death, they were actually even more fear-inspiring than before. Even Xuan Deazi was alarmed. As for Hong Chen, she was trembling in fear as she joined forces with him, unleashing all sorts of divine abilities that filled the air with the sounds of explosions. It was around this time that a gray mist suddenly began to rise up from the ground, obscuring everything. The sudden appearance of that mist caused Meng Hao's hair to stand on end. Without the slightest hesitation, he stepped forward and left the place where he had been sitting. Looking back, he waved his sleeve, causing the essence of divine flame to slam into the spot where he had just been sitting. However, nothing happened in response. His eyes began to shine, and inwardly he was more vigilant than ever. Moments ago, he had clearly sensed an indescribable coldness rushing towards him. Had he not moved away, it was likely that the coldness would have frozen him solid. However, whatever it was that had caused the coldness couldn't be detected. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all. Meng Hao backed up slowly, then vanished into the mist. Unbeknownst to Meng Hao, there really was a blurry shade laying in the spot where he had just been sitting. The shade seemed to be made completely of mist, but his eyes were clear and bright. They were crimson, and they were staring at Meng Hao. "So he can actually sense me getting near him," the shade murmured. "It seems his divine sense must be particularly strong. Well, that's fine. The stronger it is, the stronger I'll be after I possess him. I've been suppressed in here for far, far too long. Damn it, I must get out of here. I'll kill my way out if I have to. The shade distorted, then flashed into the mists and vanished. Meng Hao moved along at top speed. The intense sense of crisis he felt in this world caused him to be more vigilant than ever. As he moved along, he looked around at the mists, eyes flickering. This place is dangerous for me and everyone else in here. The arrival of this mist means that the time to counterattack is at hand. He suddenly flickered into motion, heading back in the direction he remembered Xuan Daozi and Hong Chen were fighting. Before long, the booming sounds of battle could be heard from up ahead. Xuan Daozi's bellow echoed in all directions, and the ripples of a magical technique spread out. However, the mist seemed to be covering up all the light, and Meng Hao couldn't see anything clearly. However, his eyes flickered with an increasingly strong desire to kill. Eventually, he just closed his eyes. Gradually, 19 images appeared in his mind. They were all in different directions and were surrounded by a gray, colorless world. Those were the entities he had taken control of with life-death hexing. The ones that were still around were now visible in his mind's eye, and in fact became his eyes. He flew silently through the mist slowly, threading his way through the various entities therein, and avoiding the most powerful shades of death. After a few dozen breaths of time, he shot forward with a new burst of speed. Then his eyes opened and they brimmed with killing intent. He sped forward, his right hand clenching into a fist. The power of an all-heaven Tao immortal erupted out from inside of him, as well as that of his fleshly body, as he unleashed the god-slaying fist. That fist strike suddenly appeared directly in front of Hong Chen. She was in the midst of utilizing all sorts of magics to defend against the death shades who were attacking her. In the midst of her exhaustion, Meng Hao suddenly unleashed an explosive attack, causing an expression of shock to appear on her face. Before she even had time to analyze what was happening, the god-slaying fist was upon her. A boom rattled out as the fist slammed into her chest, causing blood to spray from her mouth. Falling back, her eyes widened and she shrieked, "Meng Hao!" Even as she fell back under Meng Hao's surprise attack, she produced magical items and prepared divine abilities to fight back. However, what came at her next through the mist was an azure rock, which slashed at her with its deadly claws. Booms rang out, and even Xuan Daozi was shocked. He turned and was about to come over to help when over 10 death shades suddenly lunged madly in the way to intercept him. "Screw off!" Xuan Daozi roared. Simultaneously, Hong Chen's shrill voice could be heard once again. "Save me!" She was terrified and couldn't even see what was happening around her. She fell back, her chest mangled and bloody and her head punctured in 3 spots, out of which a reddish-white fluid oozed. Meng Hao wasn't in very good condition either. Blood oozed out from wounds all over him. After all, his previous injuries weren't completely healed, and trying to kill this old woman aggravated them. However, the killing intent in his eyes hadn't lessened at all and in fact grew even more focused. He suddenly advanced with incredible speed, sending swirling essence of divine flame toward the retreating Hong Chen. She gritted her teeth, performing an incantation gesture to unleash explosive essence power in all directions. But Meng Hao was already in a different position, having unleashed the Paragon Bridge onto her. She screamed, her body already showing signs of cracking to pieces as she continued to flee. By now, Xuan Daozi had finished cutting down the death shades which were blocking him, and was now speeding towards them. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as his left hand reached up and pushed his 4th nirvana fruit into his forehead. Suddenly, his speed increased dramatically. He shot toward Hong Chen, making a grasping motion which summoned the copper mirror. Sighing repeatedly, the parrot also emerged. Without a pause, it complied with Meng Hao and transformed into the battle weapon. That caused Meng Hao's energy to rocket up. Hefting the battle weapon, he slashed it toward Hong Chen. Xuan Daozi was racing against the clock, but apparently was out of time, and could only roar in response to what was happening. Hong Chen also roared, using all the power she could muster to defend herself. However, she had already been injured by the Seal the Heavens incantation, and her cultivation base had declined. Thanks to Meng Hao's previous attack, she was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Meng Hao could completely ignore whatever magical items or divine abilities she used to fight back. Drawing on all the power he could from his fleshly body, he sent the battle weapon streaking down in a flash of dazzling light. The scream ceased as Hong Chen's head flew off her shoulders and her body collapsed. Just when her nascent divinity was about to flee, the battle weapon smashed into it. Yet another Tao Realm cultivator had fallen by Meng Hao's hand. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and his face was ashen. The magical items and divine abilities that had been used just now actually increased the severity of his injuries. Eyes bloodshot, he shot off into the distance. Meng Hao, Xuande as he roared. The sound echoed out into the mists, filling the entire world. Some distance away, the members of the Meng clan were sustaining heavy casualties. Meng Chen was covered with blood and in flight. Han Qinglei was also out in the mists, proceeding along as cautiously as ever. Some of his followers had already been killed, and he himself was filled with fear by the 33 hells. However, these weren't the only people present. There were others. Furthermore, this was only the initial opening of the 33 hells, so not all the glowing rifts had opened up, only somewhere between 3 and 5. Therefore, some of the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance on the outside chose to brave the danger and enter, although that number wasn't significant. About 20 to 30% of them chose to enter the same glowing rift as Meng Hao. Those who were brave enough to enter obviously were not weak in terms of cultivation base. At the very least, they were in the late ancient realm. There are even some Quasi-Dao experts who were attempting to find one of the legendary items that could keep Quasi-Dao cultivators from dying. There were also more than a few Dao realm experts who entered various glowing rifts. Therefore, when Xu and Dayazi's howl echoed out, the other cultivators within the mists could hear his voice, and their hearts began to pound. Meng Hao coughed up a mouthful of blood but continued onward as fast as he could. He put the battle weapon away, as well as the nirvana fruit. His eyes were now completely bloodshot, but his chi and blood were actually flourishing. The shade that had been following him the entire time was watching him, and growing more and more greedy. Meng Hao was flying along, eyes bloodshot, when he suddenly ran into a death shade. "It's been a long time since I've actually used the blood demon grand magic," he murmured. The shade up ahead was a cultivator who turned, looked at Meng Hao, then howled as it pounced on him. Meng Hao did not place a life-death hex sealing mark onto him. Instead, he shot forward and slapped his hand out. His palm immediately turned blood-red, landing on the shade, which shuddered and then began to wither. In the blink of an eye, it was nothing more than ash. Its gray aura flew out toward Meng Hao, fusing into him and actually withering him more than before. Apparently, it wasn't any help to his wounds at all. Shaking his head, he continued onward. Before long, his eyes flickered, and he shot forward like lightning as an ancient realm cultivator appeared in front of him. This was one of the cultivators who had been part of the search parties trying to kill Meng Hao. He had actually turned tail and fled when things had gone south, but now apparently he had returned. He was looking around vigilantly, so as soon as Meng Hao closed in on him, his face flickered. Before he could do anything, Meng Hao's crimson hand snaked out and latched onto the top of the man's head. Before he could scream, Meng Hao clamped his hand over the man's mouth. The cultivator trembled as he withered. His life force, his flesh and blood, his cultivation base and soul were all absorbed in an instant. Meng Hao's face was now less ashen. Soon, nothing was left in his hand other than a desiccated corpse which dropped down and turned into ash. Meng Hao licked his lips. Eyes bright red, he continued on his way. Chapter 1236, We're Still Good Friends. Meng Hao slipped through the mists like a lone wolf in the night, completely silent. The only signs of his coming were his glowing red eyes and the fluctuations of the blood demon grand magic. No screams could be heard, as he only targeted ancient realm cultivators. By means of the blood demon grand magic, Meng Hao slowly recovered, although the process didn't go as quickly as when he had taken advantage of the gravestone. However, what Meng Hao wanted was to awaken his eternal stratum. With his eternal stratum at work, his recovery would go much more quickly. He proceeded along, absorbing other cultivators he encountered. As for the blurry shade, it kept following him, looking for the perfect opportunity to make the killing blow and possess Meng Hao. He couldn't see Meng Hao killing Hong Chen, nor could he see Xu and Dayazi chasing him. However, he could sense the brutal air radiating off of Meng Hao, and when he unleashed the blood demon grand magic, the way it sent the chi and blood boiling caused the shade to be filled with an intense desire to possess Meng Hao. "I greed have been favored by destiny for my entire life," the shade murmured. "When I was young, I was nearly killed when fighting my greatest enemy, until an extraterrestrial object fell from the sky and smashed him to death. When I ventured out into the world, I never came back empty-handed, and everywhere I went, treasure abounded. My cultivation even proceeded smoothly and without a hitch. However, when I reached the absolute peak, I met a person, a damnable bastard who deserves to die. Other than him, there has never been anyone who could suppress me. Even being sealed in here is a temporary thing. I won't remain here forever. This person here is the greatest gift that the heavens have ever bequeathed upon me. The greed in his eyes grew more intense, and yet he didn't make a move. His earlier attack had failed, so after that he had chosen to simply follow and wait. Wait and keep waiting. 1. There's slight spoiler information in this footnote regarding Renegade Immortal. Greed is a side character from that very novel. Although he hasn't appeared in the translated portion of Renegade Immortal yet, I chatted with Rex about it, and he mentioned that Greed should be showing up soon. If you follow RI, keep your eye out for this guy. Meng Hao's slaughter continued. By now, dozens of cultivators had died at his hand. At the moment, his hand was latched onto the top of another cultivator's head as he absorbed him, when suddenly, all of the hair on his body stood on end. Not waiting to finish absorbing the cultivator, he shot backward at top speed. In that same instant, a hand stretched out from the mists. It was covered with black fur and moved with incredible speed, grabbing viciously onto the half-absorbed cultivator. The cultivator screamed and was dragged back into the mists, whereupon crunching sounds could be heard. Hungry, so hungry. A growling wail could be heard, along with a sound like that of clinking iron chains. Meng Hao retreated rapidly, an expression of surprise on his face as he sensed the terrifying aura coming from within the mists. After a long moment, the aura faded away, and the wailing sound drifted off into the distance. Meng Hao looked around, feeling more apprehensive than ever. Finally, he turned and made his way off to find another Heaven God Alliance cultivator to absorb. Time passed. As he went about his work, he encountered that terrifying hand on 3 more occasions, and one time even developed into a deadly crisis. Feeling more vigilant than ever, he absorbed yet another ancient realm expert, whereupon a rumbling sound filled him, and his eyes burned with a light like that of fire. At long last, his eternal stratum was awakened from its state of withered sleep. It slowly began to work, restoring his life force and energy. In that moment, the blood-colored light in his eyes faded away, and his body's wounds began to heal naturally. It was also in that moment that a stream of divine sense swept toward him from up ahead. He backed up, but the divine sense was fast and quickly enveloped him, scanned him, and then began to completely converge in the area. "So it turns out you're here as well," said an ancient voice. A terrifying pressure began to weigh down, causing the mists in the area to be pushed away. Meng Hao's pupils constricted. Based on the intensity of the pressure, he could tell that this power exceeded that of a Tao Lord. Furthermore, he was familiar with this pressure. It was none other than the old man who had attempted to stop him from leaving the Heaven God Alliance to begin with. Meng Hao knew that he was no match for this man, not even if he were completely recovered and back at his peak. Without the slightest hesitation, he transformed into an azure rock and fled. However, the pressure was like a sharp arrow that pierced through the mists in pursuit. In fact, were it not for the mists, the old man would have been able to catch up with Meng Hao in the blink of an eye. Even as Meng Hao fled, Xuan Daozi appeared in a different direction, eyes flickering with killing intent. He had even resorted to one of his secret magics in order to lock down Meng Hao's position within the mists. The price he had paid was a significant amount of life force and longevity, leaving him looking like nothing more than a bag of bones, his aura weak even though his cultivation base hadn't been reduced. "Meng Hao, this time you're dead," he roared, shooting like lightning in Meng Hao's direction. Meng Hao's face flickered. He could tangle with Xuan Daozi for a while, but as for that old man, he was much stronger to the point where Meng Hao was terrified of him. Gritting his teeth, he continued to flee at top speed. It was at this point, just when the powerful pressure was nearing, that a faint howl echoed out, mixed with a wailing sound. "Hungry, so hungry." In addition to the voice, a sound like the rattling of iron chains could be heard. Meng Hao's eyes narrowed as he realized what the old man from the Heaven God Alliance had run into. It was in that moment that the divine sense that had been locked onto him suddenly retracted. However, Xuan Daozi's killing intent continued to bear down on him. Meng Hao's eyes glittered coldly as he suddenly spun, waving his right hand to summon the essence of divine flame and immortal mountains to fight back against Xuan Daozi. Rumbling booms could be heard, and blood oozed out of Meng Hao's mouth. Just when he was about to borrow the force of the blast to retreat, Xuan Daozi retracted the power, defeating Meng Hao's effort. "I guess you would try something like that," Xuan Daozi said, laughing coldly. Suddenly, his essence of time erupted out, causing his body to grow blurry, as if he were walking through the streams of time. Meng Hao's face fell, and he immediately utilized his walking technique. Both parties were using the Tao of Time to fight each other, causing the mists to churn and slowly form into a vortex. The vortex grew larger and larger, and the rumbling sounds grew more intense until it turned into a massive explosion. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and he tumbled off to the side. Blood also oozed out of Xuandeazi's mouth, but he didn't give up. He was already injured, and yet his eyes gleamed with excitement, and his heart was pounding. Just now, his essence had been stirred into intense anticipation. As he saw Meng Hao trying to flee again, a cold flicker could be seen in his eyes, and he suddenly threw his head back and cried out, "To all fellow Taoists in this place, I am Xuandeazi. Help me stop Meng Hao. If you encounter him, notify me immediately. To express my thanks, the One Profound Sect will bestow a quasi-Dao treasure to anyone who helps." Xuandeazi knew that Meng Hao was a slippery character. Once he escaped, it would be difficult to find him again. Therefore, he chose to make an incredible promise to enlist the aid of everyone else out in the mist. Bolstered by the power of Xuandeazi's cultivation base, his words echoed out through the entire world, to be heard by all. Everyone's eyes flickered. Simply notifying Xuandeazi of Meng Hao's presence was a much easier task than trying to kill him. All they had to do was password. If that word enabled Xuandeazi to take down Meng Hao, then they would be rewarded with a quasi-Dao treasure. Everyone was instantly excited. Meng Hao's face darkened, and he proceeded along as quickly as before. However, it didn't take long before a shadow up ahead suddenly flickered into the shape of an ancient realm cultivator. As soon as the man saw Meng Hao, he went wild with joy and bellowed, "Meng!" However, he only got one word out of his mouth before Meng Hao flashed like lightning, clamping his hand down onto the top of the man's head and unleashing the blood demon grand magic. The cultivator trembled as his chi and blood, life force, cultivation base, and soul were absorbed by Meng Hao. Even still, that one word caused Xuandeazi to unhesitatingly shoot in the direction of the call, as did some of the other powerful experts. The killing intent in Meng Hao's eyes grew stronger. Just as he was about to flee, a jubilant cry rang out through the mists. "Meng Hao's right here." The voice was actually some distance away from where Meng Hao actually was, causing the people rushing in his direction to stop in their tracks. Even as Xuandeazi frowned, another voice rang out, "He's here. Hurry, he's right here." Then another voice cried out urgently from another direction, "I saw Meng Hao. He's over here." Xuandeazi gritted his teeth, turned, and headed off in another direction. Meng Hao's jaw dropped as he realized that there were people helping him. There was little time to consider the matter. He immediately turned to flee, but then suddenly stopped as he sensed familiar fluctuations approaching, fluctuations that their owner was doing nothing to conceal. "Han Qinglei," Meng Hao said slowly as Han Qinglei floated out from the nearby mists. When they were a dozen meters or so apart, they stopped and looked at each other. "Many thanks," Meng Hao said as everything clicked. He looked deeply at Han Qinglei, clasped hands, and bowed. Han Qinglei looked back at Meng Hao with mixed emotions. Meng Hao was clearly in a very bad state, worse than he had been at any point in the windswept realm. His injuries were severe, and his body was covered with wounds. Deep exhaustion could be seen on his face, an exhaustion that medicinal pills and the mending of his wounds could not heal. It would require time to recuperate. Even still, among Han Qinglei's mixed feelings was a sense of admiration. He had heard of all the things Meng Hao had accomplished recently, how he was the subject of a deadly manhunt in the Heaven God Alliance, and how he had even slaughtered Dao realm cultivators. Because of his accomplishments, Meng Hao's name had long since spread throughout the Heaven God Alliance. Han Qinglei looked at Meng Hao, his face cold as he said, "I don't need you to thank me. As long as I'm around, the only people who qualify to kill you are other echelon cultivators. I didn't save you for your sake but for my own. Therefore take your words of thanks back. I don't need them, and in fact to accept thanks from you would be beneath my dignity. You don't qualify to thank me. Nobody in heaven and earth qualifies to thank Han Qinglei. That's who I am. In the future I will be unrivaled and unmatched. One of these days, you and I will fight to the death, and in that battle I'll personally defeat you." As Han Qinglei's words echoed out, filled with arrogance and superiority, he folded his hands behind his back and set his jaw. Meng Hao sighed. He would never forget how Han Qinglei had saved him, but seeing how arrogant, proud, and haughty he was, Meng Hao couldn't hold back from saying, "You know, if your smugness didn't make me want to give you a good beating, we could probably be good friends." Expand. As soon as the words left Meng Hao's mouth, Han Qinglei's face flickered, and he glared at Meng Hao. However, when he thought about all the things Meng Hao had done while fighting the Heaven God Alliance, he couldn't but admire him. His expression remained icy, and he snorted coldly, but at the same time he waved his hand, sending a jade bracelet flying over, which Meng Hao caught. Put that on. Not only will you become illusory, your aura will be concealed, and I can take you out of the Heaven God Alliance. Meng Hao looked at the bracelet thoughtfully for a moment, then said, as a cultivator of the 8th mountain and sea, you must be familiar with the Heaven God Alliance's search methods. I believe there to be a seal on me, or something of the sort, enabling them to track me down no matter what I do. Meng Hao looked at Han Qinglei as the sounds of explosions echoed out from the mists around him. Seal, Han Qinglei muttered. He patted his bag of holding, producing a jade slip which he studied for a moment. Then he looked back at Meng Hao. The Grand Elder of the Heaven God Society is adept with blood magic. The blood in your body permeates your organs and your aura. All he would need is a single drop of your blood to detect your presence. If you suspect something like that to be the case, it's most likely the work of the Grand Elder. He's using a blood-tracking magic. That makes things a bit difficult, Han Qinglei frowned. After thinking for a moment, Meng Hao laughed coolly and said, any technique can be broken, as long as you understand how it works. Then he lifted his right hand and pushed it down onto his chest, causing the essence of divine flame to sweep through his body, burning up his blood in the process. That burning involved indescribable pain as every drop of his blood was scorched away. After his blood was gone, he was almost like an ordinary person hovering on the brink of death. Not even cultivators could remain in such a state for very long. Meng Hao's face was ashen. The burning away of his blood also caused his body to age significantly, as it was left without a single drop of blood. But then he rotated his cultivation base, sending out cultivation base power into his body. Coupled with the intense power of his fleshly body, the blood manufacturing in his body was stimulated. Although the process happened relatively quickly, it still involved incredible pain, as well as a shocking level of danger. Even Han Qinglei was shocked by Meng Hao's vicious decisiveness. He watched as the color slowly returned to Meng Hao's face, and his life force aura was gradually restored. In the end, Han Qinglei took a deep breath and reminded himself that it would be best to never provoke Meng Hao. Meng Hao had purified himself by getting rid of all of his old blood and replacing it with fresh blood. Meng Hao wasn't sure whether or not that would free him from the Grand Elder's magical technique, but it was the only method he could think of to achieve that result. Brother Han, I'll still need a bit of assistance from you, he said. With the wave of a hand, he caused a dozen or so drops of the burned blood to coalesce in his palm. I understand, Han Qinglei said, nodding. Waving his hand, he caused a dozen figures to materialize around him. Each person took a drop of blood, then rapidly vanished off into the distance. Finally, Meng Hao put on the jade bracelet, slowly turning blurry, whereupon he floated over to Han Qinglei, where he looked like nothing more than one of his other followers. Han Qinglei cleared his throat and looked at Meng Hao out of the corner of his eyes, feeling quite satisfied. However, he knew that it wouldn't be appropriate to say anything, so he merely took a step forward, whereupon his throne of bones appeared. He sat down and then shot off into the mists. At the same time, Meng Hao and the other dozen or so illusory followers followed along. As Han Qinglei and Meng Hao flew off, the blurry shade within the mists was watching with crimson eyes. I've taken a liking to your fleshly body. Do you really think I'll just let you leave? The shade's eyes flickered with red light as he began to mutter some ancient curse, which caused a roar to erupt out within the mists, a roar like thunder that left everything in the area shaking. Hungry, so hungry, the sound echoed out, filled with an unyielding air and even rage. And yet, gradually the bellowing grew further and further away, and the mists dispersed with its departure, as if that terrifying creature was itself its source. In fact, within the space of a few breaths of time, the mists were completely gone. All of a sudden, all of the nearly 100 cultivators in the rift could see each other clearly. The man from the Heaven God Society with the astonishing cultivation base was the most powerful person present. Panting, he turned his head and looked off into the distance. He had just been fighting that enormously gigantic, terrifying creature, and the fierce fighting had been dangerous to the extreme. Everyone was on guard at the moment and was looking around to size up the situation. Soon, everyone could see Han Qinglei making his way out of the place. Meng Hao was right there next to him, and when the mist suddenly vanished, his heart sank and he cursed to himself at the sudden, discouraging turn of events. He looked over at the exit, which wasn't very far away, and began to consider making a run for it on his own. It wasn't necessarily impossible to make it. However, if he moved, it would reveal that Han Qinglei was helping him. And besides, even if he got out, He didn't have the proper status in the Eight Mountain and C to be able to escape the wrath of the Heaven God Alliance. Xuandaozi was also there, his divine sense spreading out and yet unable to locate Meng Hao. His eyes narrowed, and he gave a cold harumph as he looked over at Han Qinglei. Han Qinglei's expression was the same as ever, and he maintained the same speed as before as he rose through the air toward the exit. Xuandaozi's eyes glittered, and he suddenly flickered into motion, appearing directly in Han Qinglei's path a moment later. Glaring at him, Xuandaozi suddenly said, "Fellow Taoist Han, why are you in such a hurry to leave?" Han Qinglei's expression didn't change as he looked coldly back at Xuandaozi. Suddenly, a vicious smile appeared on his face. "Xuandaozi, your cultivation base might be higher than mine, and I might not be able to beat you in a fight, and killing me would be a simple task. But, do you dare to try? Do you dare to try to harm even a single hair on my head?" Han Qinglei stood up and roared, causing his energy to rise up dramatically. He was now more powerful than he had been in the windswept realm, and was clearly on the verge of being a threat to someone in the Quasi-Dao realm. After making a breakthrough, he would even be able to try his hand out at engaging a Quasi-Dao expert in all-out battle. "Do I need to ask your permission to go places in the 8th Mountain and see?" Swishing his sleeve, he sat back down on his vicious bone throne. Xuandaozi's face darkened. Han Qinglei had a special status in the 8th Mountain and Sea, and Xuandaozi had no desire to get into a dispute with him. However, Meng Hao was simply far too important, and Xuandaozi couldn't bear to lose him. After a moment of hesitation, he looked at the Heaven God Society elder, who stood on the ground not too far off in the distance, clasped hands and bowed. "Joshi, could you provide some assistance?" Xuandaozi's deep bow and his cordial expression made him seem very sincere. "I was on very good terms with Patriarch Blacksoul as well as with Hong Chen. The three of us joined forces to chase down Meng Hao, and now calamity has befallen both of them. Only I remain, and I swear that we'll find Meng Hao and exact vengeance, killing him in revenge for Blacksoul and Hong Chen." Xuandaozi's words were spoken very sincerely and with passion. Down on the ground, the old man from the Heaven God Society muttered to himself for a moment, then nodded. He lifted his right hand and performed an incantation gesture, then opened his eyes to reveal a flickering blood-colored glow. Meng Hao remained by Han Qinglei's side, expression normal, but heart filled with vigilance as he watched the elder from the Heaven God Society. Soon the old man lowered his hand and said, "Interesting. He must have noticed my tracking magic, then physically disseminated to escape. He must be outside already." As soon as the words left the old man's mouth, Meng Hao sighed with relief. Han Qinglei snorted coldly, then proceeded forward stoically. Actually, he had been very nervous just now as well, having had no idea that the mist would disperse, revealing that he was leaving. Xuandaozi sighed inside and stepped aside, making way for Han Qinglei to near the exit. Meng Hao is devious and cunning. If he manages to escape, it's going to be difficult to find him. Plus, it's giving him time to restore his cultivation base. If that happens, it won't be easy for me to handle him alone. However, I can't reveal this matter to anyone. Xuandaozi frowned, and his gaze once again came to fall upon Han Qinglei's back. He then looked at blurry images of Han Qinglei's followers. At first, he hadn't paid the followers any attention. After all, Joshi from the Heaven God Society had spoken his words in complete confidence. Whatever he said was sure to be true. However, as soon as he laid eyes on one particular follower among the group around Han Qinglei, Xuandaozi's essence suddenly trembled. Although it was very slight, it caused Xuandaozi's eyes to go wide, and his heart to pound. He had no time to consider the matter carefully, so he took a step forward and roared, "You're not going anywhere. Get back here." With that, he stretched out his hand, causing an enormous hand to materialize and grab toward, not Han Qinglei but Meng Hao. Meng Hao frowned. It wasn't the elder from the Heaven God Society who had discovered him, it was Xuandaozi. That in itself was very telling, and caused Meng Hao to suddenly wonder why Xuandaozi was pursuing him so relentlessly even after Patriarch Blacksoul was dead, and could not offer his services as a slave. That's the key to the matter, he thought with a sigh. Mind racing with ideas, he suddenly revealed himself, laughing coldly. Almost as soon as he appeared, Han Qinglei's face fell and he spun around. "Meng Hao, it's you. Damn it, I can't believe you were pretending to be one of my followers." Roaring, Han Qinglei stepped forward and waved his arm at Meng Hao. An incredible force surged out toward Meng Hao, hitting him before Xuandaozi could. A boom could be heard, and blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth. However, he borrowed the force of the blow to shoot off into the distance. Han Qinglei, Meng Hao shrieked. Mark the words of Meng Hao, I won't rest until you're dead. With that he sped away as quickly as possible. Han Qinglei, Xuan De as he said, glaring at Han Qinglei. The act put up between Meng Hao and Han Qinglei was too obvious, and yet Han Qinglei didn't seem to care that Xuan De as he knew. Even as Xuan De as he began to chase after Meng Hao, he cried out, Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Taoists, please help me capture this man. My promise from before still stands. The surrounding cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance looked on with flickering eyes. Many of them immediately flew out to try to block Meng Hao's path. 2 of them were actually in the Tao realm, although they were Tao lords, just 2 essences cultivators. The sudden appearance of Meng Hao caused the old man from the Heaven God Society to stare in shock. Then, a strange glow appeared in his eyes and he looked more closely at Meng Hao. Finally, he understood. He's definitely a vicious, decisive person, the old man muttered. Numerous people closed in to try to block Meng Hao's path. The two essences Tao realm cultivators couldn't be evaded easily, plus Xuan Daozi was closing in with murderous intent. If Meng Hao paused for even a moment, he would fall into the snare. As he looked around, he realized that he really was in a tight spot, like a bird in a trap with its wings clipped. It was in that moment that strange phenomena suddenly rose up within this world of graves. Chapter 1237, Detected. /expand. The entire world was shaking. The gray vault up above filled with clouds and mist, and the lands quaked as though a writhing dragon lurked underneath, on the verge of bursting out. The gravestone which rose up in the very center of the world appeared to be tilting to the side, and thunder-like rumbling could be heard from the earth underneath it. Rumble! As the massive sound echoed out, everyone, including Meng Hao, felt their minds spinning. The ancient realm cultivators coughed up blood, and their expressions were that of astonishment. Han Qinglei's qi and blood were boiling, and he hovered in midair, gasping for breath. The blurry figures around him were all forced out into the open, looks of shock on their faces. The Tao realm experts had it a bit better off. Their minds were shaken, but no blood spurted out. However, it only took a moment for another huge boom to echo out, even more boundless and powerful than the first. Rumble! That sound caused everyone under the level of a Tao Lord to cough up blood. Meng Hao's body was trembling, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth. As for the Tao Lords present, their faces were ashen as waves of shock surged in their hearts. As for the two essences Tao realm cultivators who had been trying to block Meng Hao's path, both coughed up blood, and their faces fell. Unable to deal with Meng Hao any longer, they looked down toward the ground and saw crevices spreading out in the soil beneath the gravestone. The 2 booms that had echoed out just now had come from those very crevices. Next, a third boom could be heard. It sounded like the roar of a giant, causing the lands to shake violently and the sky to dim. Xuan Daozi coughed up blood and was completely astonished. Suddenly, an ancient voice that was laced with unending venom and madness filled the entire murky world. 9 seals, I curse you to meet a horrific death. I curse all living things in your immortal world to have their bloodlines severed. You can destroy my body, but you can't destroy my soul fire. My soul cannot be destroyed by anyone who has yet to fully reach heaven trampling, so you can't kill me. You only have a heaven trampling fleshly body. Your cultivation is still a half step away. Therefore you can only suppress me. Everything shook, and soon, it was possible to see a bright light shining up from the crevices in the soil beneath the gravestone. It was a blue light that filled the entire world, almost as if what was buried in this place was not a cultivator but rather a sun. Mind trembling, Meng Hao blinked his eyes 9 times in succession, then poured the power of an all-heaven Tao immortal into his eyes. After examining the situation closely, his eyes widened. Shockingly, beneath the soil of the grave, he saw that there really was a sun, a blue sun. The sun caused massive waves to run through Meng Hao's divine sense, and for some reason, he recalled imagery from a scene that he had seen before. He saw 9 suns, pulling a vast land mass and a huge statue through the starry sky. One of those suns was the same sun he was looking at now. They looked identical. Xuan Daozi's heart trembled and blood sprayed out of his mouth. He wanted to chase Meng Hao down and kill him, but at the moment he couldn't. His body was stuck in place in midair, completely incapable of moving. As for his eyes, they brimmed with excitement as he looked at the crevices, his mind reeling. The Daosource realm actually exists. Daosource. Daosource. The actual source of all Taos. According to the basic overview I read about in the ancient records once, 9 essences paragons are analogous to the exalted celestials and ninth-tier Tao divinities of the Paramita. The Deosaurus realm of the immortal world does not expand one's enlightenment outward, nor does it take an alternative route. The key to stepping beyond the Tao realm is to continually look inward, to seek the source of the Tao. Expanding out beyond the Tao is the boundless Tao of the Paramita. As for the alternative route to stepping beyond the Tao, that is the heaven trampling of the Paramita. Xianxia was trembling, and his eyes filled with unparalleled desire and madness. He had come to a clear realization of the truth of these matters, and in fact, the number of people in the entire mountain and sea realm who knew about these things was so few that they could be counted by hand. Although he currently couldn't move a muscle, neither could anyone else, not even Meng Hao. There was only one person in this entire world who was not so intensely affected, and that was the old man from the Heaven God Society. An exalted celestial, from the Paramita, he murmured, eyes shining brightly. In almost the same moment that the entire world was shaken, the light shining from the crevices beneath the gravestone suddenly vanished. At the same time, an indescribable gravitational force suddenly appeared. The intense force sucked at everything, causing the entire world to dim. Even the vault above seemed to be on verge of being pulled in. As the ground shook, the shocked old man from the Heaven God Society bit the tip of his tongue, spitting out a mouthful of blood and performing a double-handed incantation gesture. Shockingly, 5 essences erupted out from him, which fought back against the gravitational force. He was the only person capable of such an act. No one else present was even in control of their own body. Rumbling filled the air as numerous figures transformed into beams of light that shot toward the crevices and were then consumed. The first to meet such a fate were those in the immortal and ancient realms, followed by Han Qinglei. Next were the 2 Tao realm experts, as well as Xu and Dayazi. None of them could prevent themselves from being sucked in. Meng Hao was trembling as he also transformed into a beam of light and was pulled inexorably inside. However, at the same time that Meng Hao was being sucked towards the crevice, something else happened that no one else noticed. Not too far away was a blurry shade, whose red eyes shone with greed. He suddenly shot forward at an indescribable speed, and in the blink of an eye was upon Meng Hao. The exact moment that Meng Hao fell into the crevice, he suddenly pounced, not even giving Meng Hao a chance to react. In a flash, he fused into Meng Hao, becoming one with him. In fact, the shade was so incredibly excited that it didn't notice that the moment it fused with Meng Hao, a strange light gleamed in Meng Hao's eyes. A tremor ran through Meng Hao, and then he was gone, sucked in by the powerful gravitational force. Soon, the only person left outside was the old man from the Heaven God Society, who trembled as he was slowly pulled toward the crevices. As he neared, the gravitational force increased dramatically, and a fourth roar echoed out. This old man had 5 essences, making him a 5 essences Tao sovereign. Drawing upon that power, he threw his head back and roared, causing blood to spurt out all over his body, which then transformed into an enormous Tao Chinese letter character that surrounded him. That character seemed to bestow boundless power upon him, allowing him to fight back against the gravitational force. And yet, it couldn't completely match it, and the man was dragged even closer to the crevice. The only difference was that the speed was reduced a bit. Soon, he was only about 30 meters away from the crevice. It was at that point that an angry sigh echoed out from within. The gravitational force vanished, and the crevice closed up without a trace. In that instant, the old man coughed up a mouthful of blood. His hair was disheveled, and he looked to be in very bad shape. His body was a mass of mangled flesh. He had just barely been able to fight back, but his fleshly body was weaker than his cultivation, and thus he had been severely injured. According to the legends, the exalted celestials of the Paramita were comparable to paragons. If he was in a complete state, he could cut me down in an instant. Nothing remains of his body and only his soul exists in a state of suppression. That's the only reason I had a chance to escape. Face filled with astonishment, he unhesitatingly shot up into the sky toward the exit. 1. This footnote contains some relatively major spoilers regarding other of Gen's works. Read at your own caution. Long story short, Exalted Celestial and Tao Divinity are cultivation levels from Gen's other books Renegade Immortal and Beseech the Devil respectively. Based on the content of this chapter, you can probably gain a basic understanding of how they work, and also how powerful they are in those books. Even as he left, other cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance decided to enter the place to seek good fortune. // Beneath the surface of the grave was a necropolis. The necropolis was accessible from all sides and was very large. The cultivators who had been sucked in were not sent to the same location, but were scattered about. Some ended up unconscious, others were still awake. Meng Hao was among the unconscious ones. He looked almost dead as he lay there in a side chamber, a small room with ornately carved walls. In the middle of the room was a coffin with no lid, filled with boiling white mist, tendrils of which would occasionally spill out onto the ground and dissipate. Everything was quiet in the side chamber. Meng Hao wasn't the only person lying there. There was an ancient realm cultivator laying off to the side, also unconscious. Soon, a tremor ran through the ancient realm cultivator, whose eyes then opened. He immediately sent his divine sense out. After ensuring that there was nothing dangerous in the immediate area, he cautiously rose to his feet, then looked around, completely shaken and terrified. He recalled having been consumed by the crevice, and when he realized that he was most likely deep in the ground beneath the gravestone, the hairs on his body stood on end. Then he looked around, his eyes eventually coming to rest on Meng Hao. Meng Hao? The ancient realm cultivator thought, shocked. He backed up, staring dead at Meng Hao for a moment before finally starting to search for a way out of the side hall. After finding it, he made to leave, but then stopped for a moment and looked back at Meng Hao. So he still hasn't woken up. The cultivator gritted his teeth and suddenly waved his hand, sending a flying sword shooting toward Meng Hao. Shockingly, it stabbed into his head, causing blood to flow out everywhere. Meng Hao never moved a muscle. It was as if he were dead. The cultivator could never have imagined that things would go easily. After staring in shock for a moment, his eyes went wild with joy. He's dead. He was already severely injured before. After getting sucked in here, his injuries must have worsened, but he still shouldn't have died. Acting as cautiously as possible, the cultivator sent the flying sword chopping viciously toward Meng Hao's throat. A snapping sound rang out, and blood sprayed out in a fountain as Meng Hao's head was severed cleanly from his body. The cultivator gasped, and without any further hesitation shot toward Meng Hao. Today's my lucky day. He's dead, and his bag of holding is mine. The cultivator excitedly neared Meng Hao, reaching his hand out to grab Meng Hao's bag of holding. However, even as he extended his hand, a sense of impending crisis crashed within the man's mind like lightning. All his hair stood on end, and a look of shock filled his face. He went completely stiff as he realized that Meng Hao's hand had just shot up and grabbed onto his arm. Chapter 1238, Possessed by Greed. 1. Greed's name is actually a common Chinese word to refer to a greedy person. Literally, it means greedy wolf, and that wolf aspect is somewhat relevant. However, I think that greed sounds much better than greedy wolf, so I'm going with that name. If you vehemently disagree, feel free to say something in the comments.